Christmas Eve has always been weird in my family. Not magical, not warm and fuzzy, just weird. We go through the motions, tree, food, forced carols. But underneath, there's this cold, thin layer of passive-aggressive tension, like we're all pretending to be some picture-perfect holiday family, while carefully avoiding stepping on the landmines of each other's egos. I used to chalk it up to everyone being tired or stressed, but as I got older, I realized something else. My family isn't dysfunctional because of misunderstandings. It's dysfunctional because some people in it actively enjoy stepping on others just to feel taller. My name's Nathan. I'm 32 now, but this story starts last year when I was 31. I've always been the quiet one in the family, which, ironically, gave everyone else permission to project whatever they wanted onto me. My mom called me the mellow one, as if I were just too low energy to get involved in drama. My dad used to joke that I was the accountant of the family, even though I don't technically work as one. I do freelance financial consulting, mostly for small businesses. It's remote, it pays well, and I like it. But to my family, if I wasn't waving a job title they recognized, I might as well have been unemployed. Then there's my older brother, Eric, 35, loud, opinionated, and the golden child ever since we were kids. He always had this way of taking up space in a room, like he thought oxygen itself was his by birthright. And the worst part? My parents encouraged it. I mean, they worshipped this guy. In high school, he was the football star, the one with girlfriends, the one they thought would make something of himself. Never mind that he flunked out of college his second year, started 3 businesses that failed in under a year each, and now works at a car dealership. Every family dinner still somehow circles back to Eric's doing great these days. It didn't bother me when I was younger. I just stayed out of the spotlight. I liked numbers, computers, anything that made logical sense. I started helping my dad with his taxes when I was 15. By 20, I was managing a few of their rental properties' bookkeeping on the side. They never asked questions, just handed over receipts and bank info. Nate's got it covered, they'd say. Over time, I handled more and more, mortgage payments, insurance renewals, even the wills, ironically enough. It was always under the guise of, "Oh, you're so good at this stuff, son." But let's be real. What they really meant was, "We don't want to bother." Still, I did it. Not for recognition. Not even out of love, necessarily. More out of duty. Like it was easier to be the one who kept everything running quietly in the background than to watch the whole circus burn down. But Christmas Eve last year was the moment it all clicked. The moment I realized just how invisible I really was to them. We were at my parents' house. The whole family gathered. Mom made her usual dry turkey. Dad drank a little too much wine and kept repeating the same story about the time he met some guy who almost played for the Giants. My sister Lila had flown in from Texas with her husband and their new baby, who everyone fussed over nonstop. And Eric, of course, was in rare form, swaggering around the living room like he owned it, loudly telling everyone how he was this close to making regional manager. I was sitting quietly near the tree, sipping my cider, when the conversation turned toward family traditions. My mom started reminiscing about how we used to go sledding, how Eric would always lead the charge and come back with his nose red and his coat soaked. Everyone laughed. Then she said something like, "And Nathan, you'd always be so quiet on the hill, like a little old man just watching everyone." More chuckles. I forced a polite smile. Then Eric chimed in. "You know, I bet if Nate disappeared one day, no one would even notice for, like, a week," he said with a smirk. Maybe longer. The room burst into laughter. My parents, my sister, even her husband. I remember the sound of it so vividly, this warm, collective wave of amusement that I wasn't invited to, that I was the punchline of, that, for once, no one even tried to mask with a "just kidding." I looked around the room. No one rushed to correct him. No one said, "Hey, that's not cool." No one defended me. Not even a half-hearted "don't say that." I know it might sound silly to someone outside the situation. A single comment. A joke. But it wasn't just the joke, it was everything behind it. The years of being the reliable one, the background character, the free labor, the unappreciated fixer. And now, apparently, the one they all agreed could vanish without consequence. That night, something shifted in me. I didn't say a word. Just sat there, quietly absorbing the moment like I always had. But something was different. Something had snapped. I finished my cider. I helped clear the table. I even stayed for dessert. But my mind was already miles away, sorting numbers, making lists, running through account logins and access points. Because what they didn't know, what none of them ever bothered to learn, was that I had the keys to everything. The accounts, the passwords, the legal documents, the backup drives. And if I really wanted to disappear, I could do it in a way that would make them wish they'd never laughed. That was the night the plan started forming, and it would take exactly 7 days to execute. But I'm getting ahead of myself, because before anything could happen, I had to give myself one last gift, watching the cracks in their perfect little world start to form, one tiny shift at a time, starting with the smallest thing they didn't even know I controlled. By the time the dishes were done and the dessert plates scraped clean, I had already decided I wouldn't be attending next Christmas, or any after that. But I didn't tell anyone. I just sat through the rest of the evening, wearing the same polite, invisible smile I'd worn for the last 31 years. That was the thing about being the quiet one. They didn't notice when you were truly angry. They mistook silence for peace, obedience, weakness. I stayed the night, as expected. My childhood bedroom was now a guest room, sterilized and stripped of any sign I'd once lived there. Just a bed, a few generic paintings, and a lamp that flickered if you turned it on too fast. Eric's room, of course, remained untouched, a shrine to his high school glory, complete with a framed jersey and old trophies no one had dusted in years. I noticed that when Lila visited, they put her in there. Because the baby needs more space, Mom had explained casually. I didn't argue. I never did. The next morning, I got up early, brewed some coffee, and stepped outside for some air. The cold hit me hard. It was one of those mornings where the frost clings to the edge of the porch railing and everything feels suspended in a kind of sleepy stillness. I stood there a long time, my hands wrapped around the mug, my breath visible in little puffs. I didn't feel sad, not exactly. More like hollow, like I had finally accepted something I'd been resisting for years. When I came back inside, I heard them talking. Not whispers, just casual conversation happening around the corner in the kitchen. They didn't know I was awake. He's always been weird, Eric said, snorting. I mean, come on, what grown man just disappears into spreadsheets all day? Probably doesn't even have real clients. I know, Mom replied, sounding half bored, half concerned. I do worry about him. He's so closed off. Sometimes I think he might be on the spectrum or something. He never really connects with people. Then my dad. Well, maybe if he dated once in a while instead of hiding behind a computer, he'd be a little less awkward. Lila didn't say anything, just a small, tired sigh. And that's when it landed. The truth, cold and clear. They didn't see me. Not really. They didn't understand me, didn't care to, and worse, they didn't respect me. They tolerated me like you'd tolerate a strange relative at a reunion. Someone you nod politely to but avoid inviting to anything meaningful. I left that morning without saying much. Just packed up, thanked them for the lovely evening, and drove back home with a calm I didn't expect. Because now I knew. There was no fixing this. No talking it out. No big confrontation that would somehow open their eyes and make them realize what they'd done. This wasn't a single incident. It was a lifetime of being underestimated, overlooked, and ultimately used. What they didn't realize was that I wasn't just their weird son or brother. I was the one who had been quietly managing their financial lives for years. I had access to everything. My father had always been terrible with paperwork and late on bills. When I was in college, I offered to help out as a way to stay connected. One account turned into 3, then 6. By the time I was 27, I was logging into more of their accounts than my own. Rental properties, investments, even their life insurance policies. Over the years, they handed them over one by one like it was some kind of chore they were lucky I liked doing. I created a shared spreadsheet for them, thinking it would help them keep track. They never looked at it once. They called me the walking calculator, which was meant to be funny, but it wasn't. I was their safety net. The guy who stayed up late making sure a mortgage didn't default, or that their condo in Sarasota didn't lapse on property taxes. And here they were, laughing at the idea that I could disappear without anyone noticing. I didn't start the revenge right away. No, that would have been too impulsive. I gave myself a few days to breathe, think, plan. I made a list, not of assets, those I already knew by heart, but of patterns. What payments were automated? Which emails were forwarded? Who relied on what and when? My family lived in a very specific rhythm. Rent from their tenants came in on the 3rd. The auto pay for their HOA dues hit on the 5th. Mom's credit card needed a manual transfer every 14th. It was all clockwork. Efficient. Predictable. Because I'd made it that way. And all of it ran through me. But I needed a catalyst, something that would justify, in my own mind, burning it all down. Because no matter how calm I felt, no matter how righteous I was starting to feel, there was still a part of me hoping someone would reach out. That someone, anyone, would say, "Hey, what Eric said was messed up. We're sorry." Instead, on December 30th, I got an email from my mom. "Hey, sweetie, hope you had a good Christmas. I'm wondering if you could take a quick look at Dad's 401k. He's been getting some confusing mail again, and I know you're good at translating that stuff. Love you." No mention of the joke. No mention of how I was treated. Just business as usual. I didn't reply. 2 days later, Lila texted, "Do you still have access to the Chase account for the Sarasota condo? I think Mom wants to start doing monthly payments from there instead of the BOA one. Also, sorry about Christmas. Eric can be a jerk sometimes." Sometimes. That's what she said. I replied simply, "I won't be managing the accounts anymore. Please tell Mom and Dad to make other arrangements." She read it, but didn't reply. By January 2nd, the phone call started. First Mom, then Dad, then even Eric, whose voicemail was actually polite for once. "Hey, man, can you give me a call? Mom's freaking out about some bills, or whatever. No idea what's going on. Just call her." I didn't. I spent the next week watching the storm build from a distance. My email inbox filled up with panicked messages. Some were passive-aggressive. "I'm sure you're busy, but this is really important." Others were outright accusatory. "We trusted you with this stuff, Nathan. You can't just walk away." But I could. And I did. The moment that truly broke me came on January 5th, 5 days after I cut contact. I got a call from a blocked number. Against my better judgment, I answered. It was Eric. "Dude," he started, his voice tight. "What is your problem?" I didn't answer. "You think you're punishing Mom and Dad by going silent? Real mature. You realize you're messing with their lives, right? Their mortgage payment bounced yesterday." Mom was in tears. Still, I said nothing. "And I know you're mad about the joke, or whatever. But seriously, man, grow up. You're acting like some emo teenager." I let the silence stretch out. Then he said it. "You've always been the weird one, Nate. Don't forget that the only reason you even got to handle all that crap was because we let you. Don't think you're better than us just because you know how to log into some bank accounts." And that was it. That was the final nail. Because they didn't let me. They dumped their responsibilities onto me because they didn't want to deal with them. They let me clean up their messes for years and called it help. They gave me power without realizing it. And now, they were angry I was using it. I hung up, and I started making calls of my own. Not to them, but to the institutions. I had power of attorney paperwork. Signed years ago when Dad had a medical scare. Nobody remembered. But I had the scanned copies, the notary stamps, the dates. I filed quiet revocations, started transferring small amounts into a temporary trust I'd set up months earlier, just in case I ever needed an emergency holding zone. I wasn't stealing, not yet. I was safeguarding. But even I didn't know then just how bad it was going to get. Because when I logged into the property management account for the rental units, I saw something I wasn't expecting. A massive withdrawal. Over $40,000 had been moved out in November. Not by me. Not by Dad. It was Eric. And the transaction was labeled as investment opportunity. My stomach dropped. I opened more records. Checked more transfers. And what I found next made everything personal. Because Eric hadn't just borrowed money. He'd been siphoning it. Quietly. For over a year. And no one had noticed. No one but me. I sat back in my chair, heart pounding, the full picture forming piece by piece. This wasn't going to be a silent exit anymore. This was going to be a reckoning. And they had no idea what was coming. I didn't sleep much the night I uncovered Eric's withdrawals. It was like my entire body was frozen, my mind racing, but my limbs numb. I sat in my office chair staring at the glowing screen, line after line of financial records confirming what I already knew in my gut. This wasn't a one-time emergency loan. It was a pattern, a slow siphoning of the family's money, done with zero oversight, no permission, and, of course, no accountability. He was using the rental income like it was his own personal bank account. He'd been careful, in the dumb, arrogant way people like him are careful. Not enough to hide it from someone like me, but enough that no one else in the family would ever notice. The transactions were labeled with vague but convincing tags: repairs, maintenance, HOA dues, even tax preparation. But I cross-checked every one. There were no receipts, no contractors paid, no invoices. It was all smoke and mirrors. The total came to just under $87,000 over 18 months. $87,000. And that's just what I'd found so far. The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't hit all at once. It settles in slowly, like fog. At first, I felt disbelief, then fury, then something else, something heavier and quieter. Grief. Not the kind you feel when someone dies, but the kind that seeps in when you realize they were never who you thought they were. That maybe the version of them you held on to, the version that was decent, or redeemable, or even just not malicious, never really existed at all. That night, I didn't eat. I didn't shower. I just stared at the ceiling and tried to figure out who I was now. Because without the family responsibilities, without the mask of dutiful son and helpful brother, who was Nathan? By morning, I knew one thing. I was done. Done cleaning up their messes. Done playing the background character. Done being invisible. But that didn't mean I knew what came next. For weeks, I fell into a kind of routine, not quite depression, but definitely a fog. I woke up late, ate irregularly, opened client emails, but rarely replied. I kept rereading the texts from mom, the missed calls from dad, even a half-hearted apology email from Lila. And then there were Eric's increasingly aggressive voicemails, which I stopped listening to altogether. The anger in his voice escalated with each message, going from guilt-tripping to outright threats. "You're ruining everything, man. I swear if you don't fix this. I'm not kidding. You'll regret this." The irony was overwhelming. He'd stolen nearly $90,000, and somehow, I was the villain for walking away. But even in the fog, something in me started shifting. I began going on long walks every morning, at first to clear my head, then just because it started to feel good. I found a park near my apartment with a small lake and ducks that always swam right up to the shore. I'd sit there on a bench with a coffee, watching them paddle in clumsy circles, and for the first time in years, I let myself just exist. Not as the family fixer, not as the spreadsheet guy, just as a person. It wasn't glamorous. There was no montage of me getting ripped or making $1 million in a garage startup. I didn't find religion or suddenly fall in love. I just got a little more comfortable being alone. And in that space, something unexpected happened. I started picking up work again. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. A former client reached out asking for help restructuring a small real estate portfolio. I almost said no. But then I realized, this was exactly what I'd done for my family for years. Only now, someone respected my work enough to pay me for it. So I said yes. And that job led to another. Then another. By March, I had 3 steady clients and a 4th on trial. I tightened up my website, started tracking hours properly, even hired a virtual assistant for invoicing and scheduling. It wasn't flashy, but it was mine. Built from scratch, on my terms. With no one taking it for granted. I didn't post about it online. I didn't update my LinkedIn. I didn't need applause. I just worked, quietly, efficiently, doing the thing I was always best at, but now, finally, for people who appreciated it. One night, after finishing up a call with a startup founder in San Diego, I sat back and looked around my apartment. It was modest, 1 bedroom, downtown, nothing fancy. But it was clean, organized. Mine. My eyes landed on the corkboard by my desk, where I'd pinned a single sticky note months ago. I bet you could disappear and no one would even care. It was still there, still stung a little. But now, it felt different. Less like a wound, more like fuel. I didn't need them to care anymore. Because for the first time in my adult life, I was starting to care about myself. The turning point came mid-April, in the form of a letter. Not an email, not a voicemail, a real, physical envelope. Sent certified mail. It was from a law office in Sarasota. I opened it slowly, expecting some kind of property-related update. Instead, it was a formal request for documentation. Apparently, the family condo's mortgage had defaulted, and the lender was initiating foreclosure proceedings. The letter wasn't addressed to me, but I was listed as a previous managing party. That's when I realized they hadn't replaced me, even after everything. Even after I told them, explicitly, that I wouldn't be managing the accounts anymore. They'd just assumed I'd come back eventually, that I'd fix it, that I'd swoop in and clean up the mess. And now, because they hadn't taken any responsibility. The condo was days away from legal disaster. I laughed. I mean, really laughed. It was loud and bitter and cathartic in a way that made my chest ache. Because of course they hadn't replaced me. Of course they'd assumed I'd still be handling everything behind the scenes. Why wouldn't they? That's how it had always worked. But not anymore. I didn't respond to the law firm. I wasn't legally responsible. Not anymore. And a few days later, the calls started again. Lila first, then Mom, then Eric. Desperate, panicked, frantic. And for once, I didn't feel anxious. I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. I went to the park again that day, sat on the bench by the lake, and watched the ducks drift lazily in the afternoon sun. My phone buzzed over and over in my pocket, but I didn't check it. Instead, I pulled out a small notebook, the same one I'd used years ago to track rental income. I flipped to a blank page, and I started writing. Not numbers, not budgets, just thoughts. Who I was, who I wanted to be, what I'd tolerate going forward, what I wouldn't. It was the beginning of something. A new version of me. Not the Nathan they'd built in their heads, but the one I was finally building for myself. I didn't know then how bad things were going to get for them, or how far Eric would go to try to dig himself out of the hole he'd made. But I knew this much. I wasn't stepping in this time. And when the final collapse came, I'd be watching, not with satisfaction, but with clarity, because sometimes the only way to rebuild yourself is to let everything else fall. And trust me, it was about to fall. Hard. By May, the calls had stopped. At least, most of them. Mom still tried once a week, leaving increasingly guilt-laced voicemails that blended passive concern with subtle accusations. I don't know what we did to upset you this badly, Nathan, but this isn't like you. We're family. Family doesn't just abandon each other. Funny, coming from someone who watched her oldest son humiliate me on Christmas Eve and laughed along like it was harmless banter. Eric, for his part, went quiet. Eerily so, which, for him, was like the air suddenly going still before a storm. I figured he was either trying to find a way to fix the mess on his own, or, more likely, waiting for the right moment to dump it all back on me. Like a stray dog circling the house he used to get scraps from. The foreclosure on the Sarasota condo went through. Quietly. Without ceremony. Without any last-ditch save. I followed the records online out of curiosity. A bank repossessed it in mid-May. By June, it had been sold at auction to a local investor. And my parents? They didn't call to blame me. They didn't call at all. I think that was when I finally understood just how much they'd relied on me. Not just for the finances, but for the emotional scaffolding that kept the whole fragile illusion of our family unit intact. Without me, they weren't just broke. They were exposed. They had no one left to prop them up. And that's when the idea started to form. Not revenge out of anger, not even vengeance out of spite. Something cleaner, more precise. Revenge out of principle. I didn't want to ruin them. I wanted them to feel it. To understand, maybe for the first time, that actions have consequences. That words have weight. That you can't treat someone like a doormat for decades and expect them to keep wiping your feet. But I couldn't just strike back. That would have been too easy and too satisfying for Eric. He'd spin it as me being dramatic or crazy or jealous, and they'd all believe him. No, I needed to set this up in a way where they unraveled themselves. Slowly, publicly, irrevocably. So I started gathering threads. The first step was confirming just how much control Eric had over the family assets. After the Sarasota property vanished, I dug deeper into the others. 2 rental homes in Tampa, a modest condo in Jacksonville, and an old inheritance property up in Asheville that my grandmother left us. I still had the logins to everything, though I hadn't touched them in months. I didn't make changes, just watched. And it was bad. Both Tampa homes were months behind on property tax. The Jacksonville condo had a mold inspection issue flagged by the HOA, one Eric had ignored for 5 straight emails. And the Asheville place? He tried to list it on Airbnb without ever checking if the zoning allowed short-term rentals. Spoiler, it didn't. The fines were already stacking up. My family wasn't just in disarray. They were hemorrhaging. And yet they were still pretending things were fine. I knew because I still had access to my dad's email. He'd forwarded everything to a shared Gmail address I'd set up back in 2016 and never changed the settings. He used it to communicate with tenants, contractors, banks. And through it, I watched the slow, spiraling decay of everything I'd once kept afloat. Tenants complaining about broken appliances that hadn't been fixed in weeks. A water heater leak that damaged flooring and resulted in a demand for rent abatement. Even the city of Tampa sent a warning letter about lawn maintenance on one of the rentals. It was like watching a plane nosedive in slow motion. But I wasn't just here to spectate. I was here to aim the crash. The opportunity came mid-June. Lila emailed me. Not a text. Not a call. A full, emotionally restrained, 4-paragraph email with a subject line that read, "Can we please talk?" She apologized. Not for everything, but for enough. She said she didn't realize how hurtful Eric's comment had been. That she had always appreciated me, even if she didn't show it. That mom and dad were struggling, and she was worried Eric's handling of things isn't going to work out. Translation: the ship is sinking, and she's finally looking for a life raft. I didn't reply immediately. Instead, I called my friend Jared. Jared and I went to college together. He's an attorney now, real estate and family law. We hadn't talked in months, but when I told him I had something morally gray but legally cautious I needed to run by him, he laughed and said, "Be there in 20. I told him everything. The accounts. The power of attorney I had years ago. The evidence of Eric's mismanagement. The potential legal minefield they were all dancing on. And most importantly, the documents I still had tucked away in encrypted folders on a backup drive. Copies of leases, tax forms, transfer authorizations, even emails showing Eric had claimed to be managing things with my dad's full knowledge, even though he had no legal authority. Jared listened carefully, asked smart questions, then leaned back and whistled. "You know," he said slowly, "this isn't just financial negligence. This could be actual fraud." I raised an eyebrow. "Want to really get them to feel it," he said, sipping his coffee. "Don't go after them directly. Go after the tenants. Start a little chaos from below." I blinked. "How? You still have leases, right? Names, addresses, terms." "Of course." "Then let me help you draft something. Anonymously. Something that warns the tenants that the properties are in jeopardy. They'll panic. They'll complain. They'll pull their payments. Once the income dries up, your brother will have to start making choices. And when he starts cutting corners?" Jared grinned. "He'll bury himself." That night, we stayed up drafting 3 different letters. Each carefully worded. Each factual. No lies. No slander. Just truths Eric had desperately tried to keep buried. That maintenance requests were going unfulfilled. That certain taxes were unpaid. That property insurance was overdue and liability could fall on them if an accident happened on site. Then we mailed them, anonymously, from a neighboring state. 3 letters. 3 tenants. 3 ticking bombs. Then I replied to Lila's email. "We can talk, but only in person." She agreed to meet me the following week at a coffee shop halfway between us. I chose a quiet, neutral place, small town, off the highway, unlikely to attract any of the rest of the family. When I walked in, she was already seated, clutching a latte like it was the only thing keeping her upright. "Nathan," she said, voice soft. "You look different." I smiled. "You mean like someone who finally slept?" She gave a tight smile, but there was genuine sadness in her eyes. We talked for almost 2 hours. She didn't defend Eric, not really, but she also didn't throw him under the bus. She was still tethered to the idea that he could fix things if given the chance. "He's trying," she said quietly. "He just doesn't know what he's doing." That didn't stop him from stealing. I replied, calm but firm. She flinched. I laid it all out for her. The withdrawals, the unpaid taxes, the zoning violation, and then, the kicker. I told her the condo had already been lost, and they hadn't even known. She went pale. "You're not here to ask for my help, Lila," I said gently. "You're here because you know this is bigger than you can manage." She nodded slowly. "What do? We don't do anything," I said. "But you can choose which side of this you want to be on." She looked confused. I leaned in. "You want my help? You want to rebuild this mess? Then I need proof that I'm not walking back into the same trap. I need transparency, access, and your word that if I take one step toward fixing this, it's on my terms." Her eyes welled up, but she nodded. And so, I gave her the first step. I told her to check the locks on the Jacksonville condo, because that one was about to become the stage for something a little more theatrical. See, Eric had been lying to the HOA, claiming he was in the process of hiring a mold remediation team. But no such team had ever been contacted, which meant the mold. It had spread. And thanks to Jared, I now had photographic evidence, provided by a contractor friend who, for a small fee, did a casual walkthrough for insurance quote purposes. The report was brutal. Health hazard, liability exposure, lease violation. I sent the report, anonymously, again, to the HOA, with a copy to the city. And just like that, the match was lit. Because soon, Eric would have to answer questions he didn't know the answers to, while I, for the first time in years, would be standing far outside the blast radius, waiting for the smoke to clear. The first sign that everything was about to blow came not through a voicemail or email, but from an online news article. It was late July, a humid Thursday evening. I was eating dinner alone, grilled chicken, some rice, a podcast playing softly in the background, when Jared texted me. You might want to check this out. Local landlord under investigation after tenants report unsafe living conditions. I clicked the link and there it was, a photo of one of my parents' Tampa properties, yellow tape across the front porch, city inspector standing in the doorway. The article was short but damning. Mold, electrical violations, pest infestations. The tenants had filed formal complaints. And when the inspectors came knocking, the property manager, Eric, of course, had no paperwork, no permits, no current insurance. The article didn't name him, but it didn't need to, because the next day, it got worse. A local tenant rights group picked up the story and posted about it on Facebook. Then Reddit. Then Twitter. Photos started circulating of the Jacksonville condo with black mold creeping up the walls, kitchen cabinet doors hanging by a single hinge, garbage bags stacked in the corner because of a broken disposal system. And then came the kicker. One of the tenants from the Tampa property posted a video. She was a single mom, probably in her late 20s, tear-streaked and furious, standing outside the condemned house. My kids were sleeping in that room. They've been coughing for weeks. I told the landlord 3 times. He said he was handling it, but he never even showed up. If I hadn't gotten that letter warning me, I wouldn't have known how bad it really was. That letter? One of the anonymous ones Jared and I had sent. The video racked up views, over 100,000 in a few days. And the city, once happy to let property issues slide under the radar, was suddenly under public pressure to act hard. By the time the dust started to settle, Eric had received 2 cease and desist letters, 3 formal tenant lawsuits, and an audit request from the Florida Department of Revenue for misreported rental income. And me? I stayed silent. Lila was the only one who knew the truth, that I'd been the architect behind the unraveling. She kept her word. She stayed out of it publicly, but fed me updates from the inside. Eric's falling apart. She whispered over the phone one evening. He's blaming everyone but himself. Says the tenants are lying. Says you hacked the accounts and made it all happen. Of course he does, I said, stirring my tea. It's always someone else's fault. What are Mom and Dad saying? She hesitated. They're scared. Dad's not talking much. Mom's been crying. I think she finally realizes how much they leaned on you. I didn't reply right away. I was staring out my window, watching the street lamps flicker to life. Are they sorry? I asked quietly. Lila exhaled. They don't know how to say it. But yes, at least. I think Mom is. She keeps saying, we never appreciated him. Not really. I nodded slowly. It wasn't satisfying. Not really. But it was something. Still, I wasn't done. The final piece of the plan came together thanks to Jared again. I'd mentioned in passing that Eric had been drawing money from family-owned accounts, funds that were, legally, still part of the shared inheritance left by our grandmother. Jared perked up. Did he ever get explicit legal authority to move that money? He asked. No. He just used Dad's login. Perfect, Jared said. Then we have grounds for civil misappropriation of funds. If you're willing to file. I hesitated. Not because I felt bad for Eric, but because I knew a lawsuit would be public. It would be permanent. No going back. Then I remembered Christmas Eve. I remembered the laughter. I remembered Eric's voice, smug and sure, saying, I bet you could disappear and no one would even care. And I said, let's file. Jared helped me draft the documents. I didn't sue for the full $87,000, just a portion. Enough to prove the point. Enough to show I could go further if I wanted. We sent the notice via registered mail. Eric didn't respond. Then the court date arrived. He didn't show, so the judge ruled in my favor by default. I won a judgment of $26,000 and change. And then came the final blow. With the judgment in hand, Jared helped me file a lien against the remaining family property, Asheville, the house my grandmother had left for all of us. The house Eric was planning to sell, quietly, to cover legal fees. But now, he couldn't touch it. Not without paying me first. When the lien was processed, I didn't announce it. I didn't gloat. I just mailed a single envelope to my parents' home. Inside was a copy of the lien, a copy of the judgment, and a note written in my cleanest, smallest handwriting. You always said I was good with paperwork. Nathan, I don't know how they reacted. I didn't ask. I didn't need to. What I do know is that Lila called me 2 days later, her voice trembling with emotion. They know now, she said. I figured they might. They're asking if they can talk to you. All of them. Tell them I'm not ready. I said. A pause. Will you ever be? I thought about it. Thought about the years I'd given them. The things I did out of love, out of duty, out of a desperate hope to be seen. Then I thought about the peace I'd found since stepping away. The quiet mornings. The park bench. The clients who respected me. The life I'd built that had nothing to do with them. I don't know, I said honestly. But I do know one thing. What's that? I'll never be invisible again. She didn't reply, just exhaled. And that was the end of it. Months passed. The lawsuit faded into court records. Eric's name began appearing on Reddit threads and Facebook tenant groups, a cautionary tale of what happens when slumlords get sloppy. Last I heard, he moved out of state. Took a job as a salesman for some solar company. Tried to start over somewhere no one knew him. Mom and Dad, they're still in the house. They tried managing the remaining property on their own for a while, but after a second round of code violations, they sold it off, at a loss. And me? I'm still working with clients. Still taking long walks. Still adding to that notebook where I keep track of who I am, not who they tried to make me be. And every so often, when I feel that old ache, that voice in the back of my mind whispering you don't matter, I think back to that moment. That moment on Christmas Eve. That circle of laughter. That careless, cutting sentence. I bet you could disappear and no one would even care. And I smile. Because I did disappear. And when I did, I took everything with me. And they finally noticed. My name's Nathan, I'm 29, and I never thought I'd be the kind of person to air my family drama online. But here we are. The whole mess started just after my mom passed away. She wasn't just my mom. She was the glue that held every brittle piece of our family together. Without her, all the cracks started showing, and some of those cracks were more like gaping canyons. My older brother, Lucas, was the first to take advantage of it. At the funeral, I could already sense the tension. People mourn in different ways, sure, but Lucas had this odd energy about him, like he wasn't grieving so much as calculating. He kept hovering around conversations about Mom's house, Mom's savings, even the little things like her jewelry. Every time someone mentioned how much they'd miss her, Lucas would nod, but his eyes would flicker like he was elsewhere, planning something. It didn't sit right with me, but I kept my mouth shut. Losing Mom was enough pain for 1 week, and I wasn't about to pick a fight with him there of all places. Then came the reading of the will. The lawyer had everyone sit in the old dining room, the one where Mom used to make us all sit down together for Sunday dinners no matter how much we fought during the week. I took the chair she always made me sit in, the one closest to the kitchen, and it felt heavy, like I was carrying her absence on my shoulders. That's when Lucas stood up before anyone else could even begin. He didn't just stand, he performed, clearing his throat, straightening his jacket, looking around the room like some actor about to take center stage. Then he dropped the first bomb. Since I took care of her, the house and savings belonged to me. The room went silent. My aunt's mouth opened slightly, like she wanted to say something but didn't dare. I felt my stomach twist because that wasn't true, not entirely. Yes, Lucas lived closer and visited sometimes, but took care of her. Mom had a nurse. I handled all the paperwork, the bills, even stayed over plenty of weekends to help her with groceries and medication. But the way Lucas said it, as if he was the sole devoted child, made me feel like I'd just been erased from the story. Then he did something worse. He waved a piece of paper. He said it was Mom's signature, that she'd written up her wishes in her own words, giving him everything. My heart dropped when I saw it because from across the room, I could already tell something was off. The handwriting looked shaky, uneven, almost like a bad copy of her neat, looping script. But Lucas held it high like a holy text, as if we all just had to accept it. I didn't argue. Not yet. Instead, I nodded slowly and said, interesting, while trying to keep my face calm. Inside, though, my thoughts were racing. Lucas was pulling something bold, something ugly, and he was so sure of himself that he didn't even hide the smug curve of his mouth. But I knew something he didn't. Something Mom had done long before she passed. Something that made his little performance meaningless. And in that moment, I had to hide a smile. Because Lucas thought he was already standing on top of the mountain, but he had no idea the ground beneath him was about to crumble. That was the first sign of disrespect, the opening act of what would turn into a full-scale war between me and my brother. And as much as I wanted to call him out right then and there, I knew patience was the key. Let him feel victorious for now. Let him think he's fooled everyone. The higher he climbed on his fake pedestal, the harder he'd fall when the truth finally came crashing down. And so, I sat back, keeping quiet, my fists clenched under the table. I could already feel the tension building like a storm on the horizon. This was just the beginning, and I could sense things were only going to get uglier from here. Lucas didn't waste any time basking in the silence he'd created. The lawyer hadn't even opened the official envelope yet, but my brother was already strutting like the verdict was final. He tucked that suspicious signature paper back into his folder and sat down with this smug little smirk plastered on his face, the kind that made my blood simmer. I caught my aunt's eyes flicker toward me, then back at Lucas, but she didn't say a word. No one did. That silence gave him permission to keep going, and oh, did he ever. Over the next few days, Lucas began acting like the house already had his name etched above the front door. Mom's place, her home of 30 years, still smelled faintly of her lavender candles, but that didn't stop him from marching through the rooms like a landlord taking inventory. He told me, "You should probably start boxing up your things, Nathan. Mom would want me to keep the house as it is." You know, her memory intact. The nerve of him, as if I had clutter lying around in the corners of her house. The only things I had there were a couple of old photo albums in the attic and maybe a box of childhood books she refused to throw away. But Lucas spoke with this tone that implied I was a guest overstaying my welcome in my own mother's home. I bit my tongue and said, "I'll deal with my stuff later, just to keep the peace." But that peace didn't last long. By the end of the week, Lucas had called a family meeting in the living room. I walked in to find he'd already seated our cousins and a couple of extended relatives around Mom's coffee table, where he had spread out bills, insurance papers, and even a pen sitting dramatically on top of a yellow legal pad. He cleared his throat like some kind of CEO preparing to present quarterly earnings. As the one who cared for Mom, he started again, repeating his script. "I'll be taking over all her affairs. The house is mine. The savings will be consolidated into an account under my name." And he actually had the audacity to glance at me. "Nathan doesn't need to worry about it. He has his own life to live." I nearly laughed out loud at that. My own life to live. I'd been the one juggling Mom's medical bills, making sure her prescriptions were filled, driving her to endless doctor's appointments when Lucas was too busy. Yet here he was rewriting history in front of everyone. One of our cousins, Grace, raised a timid hand like she was in school. "Shouldn't we, wait for the official will?" she asked softly. Lucas waved her off. "Oh, don't worry. I've got it here," he said, patting that same folder with the fake paper inside. "The lawyer's just going to confirm what Mom already wrote herself. I'm just trying to make things easier on everyone by getting ahead." The manipulation was thick in the air. He wasn't just claiming things. He was trying to gaslight the entire family into believing this had always been the plan, that questioning him would mean disrespecting Mom's wishes. And worse, he kept bringing up how he took care of her, as if repeating the phrase enough times would make it truth. After that meeting, I noticed how quickly relatives began treating me differently. A cousin I'd grown up with, Michael, pulled me aside and said, "Look, Nathan, if Mom wanted Lucas to have the house, maybe it's best to just let him. You don't want to make this ugly." Ugly? The situation was already festering like a wound. Lucas had poisoned the well, painting himself as the saint and me as the outsider, the greedy younger brother trying to snatch something that wasn't mine. Every time I opened my mouth to defend myself, someone would give me this look, like I was the one stirring drama in the middle of our grief. The worst part was watching Lucas move into Mom's bedroom like he belonged there. He didn't even wait. Within days, he'd swapped her floral bedspread for his own gray comforter, stacked his sneakers neatly in her closet, and started rearranging the furniture. I walked in once and caught him measuring the wall where her cross had hung for decades, muttering something about a bigger TV fitting nicely. That hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just entitlement anymore, it was erasure. He wasn't preserving her memory. He was scrubbing it away and replacing it with his own. And then came the real slap in the face. One evening, when I stopped by to drop off some mail from the lawyer, Lucas met me at the door with his arms crossed. "Nathan, I don't think you should come by unannounced anymore. This is my home now, and I need to protect my space. If you need anything, call first." I froze on the porch, staring at the house where I'd grown up, where Mom had hugged me after my first heartbreak, where she'd spent her final days. My home. And now my own brother was barring me from it like I was a trespasser. Inside me, something snapped. I didn't yell. I didn't shove past him. I just smiled politely, turned on my heel, and walked back to my car. Because in that moment, I realized the truth. Lucas was overplaying his hand. He was digging himself deeper into a pit he couldn't climb out of. And when the real will was read, the official one Mom had carefully written and signed, everything he'd built on lies and manipulation would collapse. But for now, I let him think he'd won. I tried to keep my distance after that night on the porch. I told myself to be patient, to let the lawyer handle everything, to not get sucked into Lucas's games. But Lucas wasn't satisfied with just staking his claim. He needed everyone to see him as the rightful heir, the martyr who gave up his life for Mom. And to do that, he had to drag me down in front of the family. The first strike came quietly, through whispers. A week after the funeral, I noticed cousins giving me side-eye at gatherings, or suddenly changing the subject when I walked into the room. It didn't take long to find out why. Lucas had been telling everyone that I hadn't even visited Mom in her last months, that I'd abandoned her, while he was the only one who stayed. He spun this story so smoothly that some relatives, people who should have known better, actually started to believe it. Grace, the cousin who'd spoken up at his so-called meeting, called me late one night. "Nathan," she said, "I don't know what's going on between you and Lucas, but people are saying you didn't care for Aunt at all, that you only show up now because of the inheritance. Is that true?" Her voice was hesitant, like she didn't want to accuse me, but couldn't ignore the rumors. My chest tightened. I remembered every Sunday I'd spent sitting with Mom in that kitchen, every grocery trip, every night in the hospital waiting room while Lucas claimed he was too busy with work. And now he had the gall to erase all of that with a few poisonous words. But the rumors were just the beginning. The real betrayal hit harder. One afternoon, I stopped by the house, my mom's house, because the lawyer had asked me to pick up some documents. I'd called ahead, as Lucas demanded, and he grudgingly agreed to let me come by. When I arrived, I walked through the front door and felt something was off immediately. The walls were bare. Mom's paintings, her watercolors of the garden she'd loved so much, were gone. The shelves that used to hold family photo albums were empty. Even her little porcelain angel figurines, which she'd collected since before I was born, had vanished. I found Lucas in the living room, his feet propped up on the coffee table, flipping through a glossy real estate magazine. When I asked what happened, he didn't even look up. "Oh, I sold those," he said casually. Most of Mom's stuff was clutter. Buyers don't want to see personal junk when a house is being prepped. I froze. "Sold." My voice cracked. "Those weren't yours to sell, Lucas. Those were her things, our family's memories." He finally glanced at me, his expression flat. "Look, Nathan, someone had to start making responsible decisions. You weren't here. I was. So I did what had to be done." I walked through the house in disbelief. Her jewelry box, gone. Her sewing machine, the one she'd used to make our Halloween costumes when we were kids, gone. Even the framed photo of us as children sitting on Santa's lap, one of Mom's favorites, had been stripped from the mantel. The house looked hollow, like someone had gutted her presence out of it. I spun back to him, anger boiling in my chest. "You had no right. None. That wasn't clutter. That was her life. How dare you sell it without even talking to me?" Lucas leaned back, smirking. "Don't get sentimental. You've always been too emotional about this stuff. Mom trusted me to handle things. You're just here trying to make yourself look good after being absent for so long." That cut deep. It wasn't just manipulation anymore. It was a knife twisted straight into everything I had done for her. He was rewriting history in real time, tearing away the proof of her life, erasing the physical reminders of her love, and pinning the blame on me. But the final straw came when I stepped into Mom's bedroom. The closet door was wide open, and I saw it immediately, her jewelry chest. Or rather, the space where it used to be. The small mahogany box she'd kept on the dresser, with her wedding ring nestled inside, along with a few heirlooms passed down from her mother. Gone. I turned on Lucas, my voice shaking. Where is it? He didn't even flinch. The ring? Sold it last week. Got a good price, too. Don't worry, I'll put it to good use. Something inside me broke at that moment. That ring wasn't just a piece of metal. It was the symbol of everything Mom had held on to after Dad died. She used to twist it gently whenever she was thinking, like it kept her grounded. And Lucas had sold it like it was nothing more than spare change in a pawn shop drawer. I remember standing there in the doorway of her empty room, my hands trembling, my throat so tight I could barely breathe. That was the turning point. The moment I realized Lucas wasn't just entitled. He was dangerous, to Mom's memory, to the truth, to everything I cared about. And as much as it shattered me to see what he'd done, it also lit something inside me. A quiet, burning resolve. He thought he'd won. He thought he could strip the walls bare, spread lies, and walk away with everything. But he had no idea what Mom had done before she passed. No idea what was waiting for him once the official will was read. For the first time since the funeral, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Because Lucas had crossed a line that couldn't be undone, and I knew then that when the time came, I wasn't just going to defend myself. I was going to make sure his house of cards came crashing down in front of everyone he'd fooled. After that day in Mom's bedroom, I couldn't shake the image of her jewelry box being gone, the hollow space on the dresser where it had always sat. It haunted me. I went home to my apartment that night, sat down at the kitchen table, and just stared at my hands. They were still trembling. The anger I felt was suffocating, but underneath it was something heavier, a crushing sense of powerlessness. Lucas had stripped Mom's house bare, sold off her things, poisoned the family against me, and carried himself like a king sitting on a throne he hadn't earned. And the worst part? Everyone else seemed to be falling in line. It didn't matter what I said, because his version of the story, his lies, were louder. Over the next week, the isolation grew sharper. A cousin who used to call me almost daily suddenly stopped answering. An uncle who'd promised to stay neutral pulled me aside and said, "Maybe you should just let Lucas have it, Nathan. It's not worth tearing the family apart." Every word felt like another door closing, shutting me out of my own blood. The lowest point came at a family dinner. Lucas had organized it, naturally, under the guise of honoring Mom's memory. But when I arrived, it was clear what the real purpose was, parading himself as the rightful heir. He stood at the head of the table, telling stories about how he sacrificed for Mom, stories that twisted the truth until I barely recognized them. When he described driving her to the hospital during one of her bad spells, he conveniently left out that it had been me sitting by her bedside all night while he went home to get some rest. I tried to interject, to correct him gently, but the room turned on me like I'd broken some sacred rule. "Nathan," one of my aunts snapped, "this isn't about arguing. Let Lucas speak." I swallowed hard and sat back. My appetite evaporated. By the end of the night, I felt like a ghost at the table, present but invisible, every word I said dissolving before it landed. When I left, I sat in my car for a long time, the engine off, the street lamp casting a dim glow across the windshield. I'd never felt so small, so cut off. It was like Lucas had stolen not just Mom's belongings, but my place in the family itself. That was my rock bottom. The realization that if I kept fighting on his terms, if I kept trying to argue louder than his lies, I would lose. Because he was controlling the narrative, painting me as greedy and absent, while I was the one clinging to memories and truth no one wanted to hear. But rock bottom has a strange way of clearing your vision. Sitting in that car, staring out at the empty street, I realized I couldn't fight him head on. Not yet. I had to bide my time, let him dig his hole deeper, let him expose himself with his greed and arrogance. That's when I remembered Mom's quiet wisdom, something she told me once after Dad passed. Patience is what separates strength from anger. Anger burns itself out. Patience wins in the end. So I decided to be patient. I stopped showing up at Lucas's orchestrated family meetings. I stopped trying to argue with cousins or defend myself against his lies. If they wanted to believe him, let them. I started walking away, retreating into silence, letting Lucas think he had finally broken me down. Because the truth, the real truth, was sitting in a sealed envelope at the lawyer's office, waiting for its moment. In the meantime, I began to prepare quietly. I went through my own folders and files, gathering every piece of evidence I had of the time I'd spent caring for Mom. Hospital records, receipts from prescriptions I'd picked up, even text messages she'd sent thanking me for staying overnight. I didn't know exactly how I'd use them yet, but I knew I'd need them when the time came. Lucas thought he'd banish me to the shadows, but what he didn't realize was that shadows can be powerful. They give you cover, time to think, time to plan. And as I sat alone in my apartment night after night, the anger inside me shifted. It wasn't wild or frantic anymore. It was steady, like a low fire burning in a hearth, waiting for the right moment to spread. I let Lucas keep climbing higher on his fake pedestal, knowing all along that the higher he went, the harder the fall would be when the truth finally came out. The weeks after that family dinner were the quietest of my life. Quiet, but not empty. I realized quickly that stepping back from Lucas's chaos gave me something I hadn't had since Mom got sick: space to breathe, space to think. At first, it felt strange, almost like I was surrendering, but then I started to notice a shift. Without Lucas constantly in my ear, without the pressure of trying to defend myself to a family that had already chosen sides, I found myself focusing on things I'd neglected for months. Work, for one. I'd been scraping by, juggling late nights at the office with Mom's care, always putting her first. After she passed, I was too drained to really focus. But now, with that fire burning quietly inside me, I poured myself into projects at work. I stayed late, volunteered for assignments nobody else wanted, and channeled all my frustration into proving myself. My boss noticed. Within 2 months, I'd been given a promotion, nothing huge, but enough to make me stand taller, enough to remind me I was capable of building a life that didn't revolve around Lucas's lies. And then came the money. With the promotion came a better paycheck. I tightened my spending, saved aggressively, and before long, I was able to move out of my cramped apartment into a condo across town. It wasn't massive, but it was mine. For the first time since Mom's passing, I looked around my own space and felt pride. Not the hollow pride Lucas paraded around with, but real pride. Earned, solid, untouchable. But success wasn't just financial. It was personal too. I reconnected with friends I'd pushed aside during Mom's illness, friends who welcomed me back without judgment. They didn't care about Lucas's version of events. To them, I was still Nathan, the guy they'd laughed with, worked with, shared years of memories with. That circle gave me strength, reminding me that family wasn't only blood, it was the people who stood by you even when others turned their backs. Meanwhile, Lucas grew bolder. His arrogance blossomed in my absence. I started hearing through the grapevine that he was bragging about finally getting what he deserved, talking about renovations he planned to make to Mom's house, even mentioning trips he'd take once his inheritance came through. Each story made me shake my head. He didn't even realize he was stacking kindling around himself, waiting for the spark. Because what he didn't know, and what made it easier for me to smile through it all, was the ace up my sleeve. Months before Mom died, she'd taken me aside during one of our quiet evenings together. She had this look in her eye, tired but sharp, like she wanted to make sure I understood something important. She told me about her will, the real one. She'd gone to the lawyer, updated everything, and made sure it was airtight. "I know your brother," she'd said softly, "and I know he'll try to take more than he deserves. But don't worry, I've made sure the truth is protected." I hadn't told anyone about that conversation, not a soul, but I carried it with me like armor, especially now. Every time Lucas sold another piece of her life or gloated about his supposed victory, I remembered Mom's words. And instead of despair, I felt calmer, stronger, because I knew what was coming. As my own life improved, work, friends, even my health, as I started taking better care of myself, I realized something else. Revenge wasn't just about the final strike. It was about building myself up so high that when Lucas inevitably fell, the contrast would be undeniable. He'd be exposed not just as greedy, but as pathetic compared to what I'd become. And so, while he bragged, I prepared. I organized every record I had of helping Mom. I built a network of support outside the family that Lucas couldn't touch. I strengthened myself financially, emotionally, and mentally. Slowly, I was no longer the ghost at the table. I was becoming someone who didn't need their table at all. Lucas thought he had silenced me, But what he didn't realize was that I was rising quietly in the background, growing into someone he couldn't manipulate, someone he couldn't erase. And soon, the day would come when the lawyer finally called us in, the day Lucas had been waiting for, the day he thought would cement his victory. I was ready for it, more ready than he could ever imagine. The letter from the lawyer arrived on a Wednesday morning. I remember the exact moment because I'd just brewed a fresh cup of coffee and was checking emails before heading into work. The envelope slid under my door with a soft thud, plain and unassuming. But the second I saw the law firm's letterhead, my pulse quickened. Inside was a notice. The official reading of Mom's will was scheduled for the following week. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the letter, the steam from my coffee curling into the air. For months, I had been waiting for this moment, quietly building myself back up while Lucas flaunted his ownership of everything. Now the countdown had begun. But before the day arrived, something else happened. Something that gave me the edge I didn't even realize I needed. At work, part of my promotion had given me access to new responsibilities, including managing budgets and contracts. That's where I stumbled into a seminar on document authentication, a dry-sounding workshop that ended up being anything but. The speaker, a forensic handwriting analyst, demonstrated how signatures could be faked and how easy it was to spot subtle differences if you knew what to look for. My mind instantly flashed to that paper Lucas had waved in the dining room, the one with Mom's signature. After the seminar, I lingered, introducing myself to the analyst, a woman named Dr. Patel. I asked a few casual questions about personal documents, wills, and the process of verifying handwriting. She smiled politely, but when I hinted that I had a family matter involving questionable paperwork, she leaned in a little closer. "If you ever need an expert opinion," she said, handing me her card, "give me a call. You'd be surprised how many families get torn apart by forged signatures." I slipped her card into my wallet, and it felt like sliding a dagger into a sheath. Quiet, hidden, but sharp enough to pierce when the time came. That wasn't the only weapon I gained. A few days later, while sorting through my folders at home, I found a series of text messages from Mom that I had almost forgotten about. They were simple things, her thanking me for bringing her groceries, reminding me of her medication schedule, telling me how much she appreciated me being there. One message stood out above the rest. It read, "Nathan, I'm glad we finalized everything with the lawyer today. I feel relieved knowing my wishes are clear. Don't let Lucas bully you when I'm gone. Love you." I just sat there holding my phone, staring at those words. My chest tightened, but not with sadness this time, with determination. That message wasn't just proof of my involvement in her care. It was Mom's voice reaching out from the past, confirming what I already knew. She had anticipated this fight, and she had trusted me to withstand it. Meanwhile, Lucas kept slipping. With every passing day, he grew louder about his inheritance. At one point, he even bragged to a mutual friend about planning to refinance Mom's house for a big renovation project. The arrogance was staggering. He was already spending money he didn't have, counting on a win that wasn't his. And then, as if the universe was nudging me along, Grace, the cousin who'd quietly doubted Lucas from the start, called me out of the blue. "Nathan," she whispered over the phone, "I think something's wrong. Lucas told me he had proof Mom wanted him to have everything, but when I asked to see it again, he got defensive. He wouldn't show me. He said I was disrespecting her memory by questioning him." I closed my eyes, smiling to myself. His cracks were starting to show. People were beginning to notice. By the time the day of the will reading drew near, I felt like I was standing on solid ground again, stronger than I had been since the funeral. Lucas thought he'd isolated me, but in reality, he'd only made me more focused. I had allies, quiet ones, maybe, but enough. I had evidence. I had an expert waiting on call. And most importantly, I had Mom's voice, her love, and her foresight guiding me from beyond. Lucas had built his empire on lies, but I had something he would never have, the truth, sharpened and ready. And when we all sat down at that long oak table in the lawyer's office next week, with Lucas puffed up like a king waiting for his crown, I was going to let him walk straight into his own downfall. The day of the will reading felt surreal. The air outside was heavy with late summer heat, and as I walked up the steps to the lawyer's office, my palms were damp. Not from nerves, at least, not entirely, but from the weight of knowing this was the moment everything had been building toward. The office was old, with dark wood paneling and the faint smell of paper and leather that reminded me of libraries. When I stepped into the conference room, Lucas was already there. He was leaning back in his chair like he owned the place, one arm draped lazily across the backrest, his folders sitting in front of him like some prized possession. "Glad you could make it," he said, smirking. "I was beginning to think you decided to bow out gracefully." I didn't rise to it. I just slid into the chair across from him, nodding politely. "Wouldn't miss it." Family trickled in. Our aunts, a few cousins, even Uncle Harold, who lived 2 states away. The air buzzed with quiet chatter, but I noticed something different this time. Grace caught my eye and gave me the faintest nod, like a secret handshake. A small thing, but it steadied me. Finally, Mr. Sullivan, Mom's lawyer, entered the room carrying a thick, sealed envelope. He was a man of precision, every movement deliberate, every word measured. He took his seat at the head of the table and cleared his throat. "We are gathered today to read the last will and testament of Margaret Hayes," he began, his voice calm but firm. "Before I do so, I understand there has been some confusion." That was Lucas's cue. Right on schedule, he leaned forward, sliding his folder across the table. "There's no confusion," he said smoothly. "Mom wrote down her wishes. I have her signed statement right here. The house and savings were meant for me, as repayment for the years I cared for her." He opened the folder with a flourish, pulling out the paper and holding it aloft like some kind of trophy. His eyes swept the room, daring anyone to contradict him. A few relatives exchanged uneasy glances. Mr. Sullivan didn't even blink. He reached out, took the paper carefully, and adjusted his glasses. For a long moment, the room was silent except for the faint rustle as he examined it. Then, in a tone so neutral it was almost chilling, he said, "This is not a valid legal document." Lucas's smirk faltered. "What do you mean?" "That's Mom's signature. She wrote it herself." Mr. Sullivan set the paper down, folding his hands neatly on the table. "I am familiar with your mother's handwriting, as she updated her will with me personally. This signature does not match her authentic hand. Furthermore, even if it were genuine, this document lacks the necessary witnesses and notarization required to be legally binding." The silence that followed was thick, punctured only by a few gasps. Lucas's face flushed red, but he wasn't done yet. "You're wrong," he snapped. "She told me herself. She wanted me to have everything. Nathan was never around." That's when I leaned forward, my voice calm but steady. "That's not true, Lucas. And you know it." He whipped his head toward me, eyes blazing. "Don't you dare." But I cut him off, sliding my phone onto the table. "Mom told me about her real will months before she passed. She made it clear. She even texted me after finalizing it." I tapped the screen, pulling up the message, and turned it so everyone could see. "Nathan, I'm glad we finalized everything with the lawyer today. Don't let Lucas bully you when I'm gone. Love you." The room collectively inhaled. Aunts leaned closer, cousins whispered. Grace's eyebrows shot up, and I saw Uncle Harold sit back in his chair, lips pursed. Lucas sputtered. "That doesn't prove anything. You could have." Mr. Sullivan raised a hand, silencing him. Then he opened the sealed envelope and pulled out the official will. "There will be no more speculation. This is Margaret Hayes's final, notarized will and testament, witnessed by 2 parties and kept in my possession until today." He began to read. The words washed over the room like a tide, each one dismantling the lies Lucas had built. The house was to be split between both of us equally. The savings were to be divided fairly, with a portion set aside for charitable donation, something Mom had always wanted. Her personal belongings, the heirlooms, were to be shared thoughtfully, not sold off like junk. And then came the part that hit Lucas like a hammer. A clause Mom had added specifically, naming me as the executor of the estate. Not him. Me. Gasps rippled through the room again. Lucas's jaw clenched so tightly I thought his teeth might crack. Mr. Sullivan looked up from the document, his gaze cool. "Your mother was very clear about her intentions. She anticipated difficulties and made sure her wishes would be carried out without interference." I sat there, hands folded calmly, while inside I felt a deep, steady surge of vindication. Lucas had strutted, lied, and manipulated his way into believing he'd already won. But here, in black and white, was Mom's voice, clear, undeniable, and final. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I watched the smug mask slip from his face. The room stayed silent after the will was read, the kind of silence that feels heavy, almost suffocating. Lucas sat frozen, his face pale beneath the flush of anger. For once, he didn't have a script prepared. He looked around the table, waiting for someone, anyone, to defend him, but no one spoke. The family that had once nodded along to his lies now avoided his eyes, their silence louder than any condemnation. Finally, Uncle Harold broke it. "Lucas," he said slowly, shaking his head, "you sold off your mother's belongings. You lied to all of us. And for what? Greed." Lucas's mouth opened, but no words came out. He stammered something about misunderstanding and Mom's wishes, but the strength was gone from his voice. He looked smaller somehow, like the pedestal he'd built had been yanked out from under him in an instant. Grace leaned forward. "You tried to make us believe Nathan didn't care. You tried to erase what he did for her. But it's all right here," in her words. "You can't argue with that." The shift was immediate. Relatives who had once whispered doubts about me now turned toward Lucas with narrowed eyes and pursed lips. He had spent months painting himself as the saint, but now the mask was gone. Everyone could see what lay beneath. Not devotion, not sacrifice, but entitlement and deceit. Mr. Sullivan cleared his throat, breaking the tension. "As executor, Nathan will oversee the distribution of assets and ensure the estate is settled in accordance with Margaret's wishes. Any unauthorized sales of her property will need to be accounted for and may be subject to legal action." He paused deliberately. "That includes jewelry and heirlooms recently removed from the home." Lucas's head snapped up, panic flashing across his eyes. "You can't. Those things are gone." I leaned forward, my voice calm but firm. "You'll have to explain that to the court, Lucas. Every dollar, every item you sold, it all has to be reported." Mom made sure of it. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. For once, he had no clever retort, no smug dismissal, just fear. The rest of the meeting wrapped quickly after that. Relatives left in clusters, whispering to each other, casting glances back at me that were filled with a mix of shame and apology. Grace gave my shoulder a squeeze before she walked out. Uncle Harold clapped me on the back, muttering, "Your mom would be proud, kid." Lucas lingered until the end, standing stiffly by the table. "This isn't over," he hissed at me under his breath. I met his glare with a steady look. "It is." Mom made sure of that. For a moment, I thought he might lash out, but instead he turned sharply on his heel and stormed out of the room, the sound of the door slamming echoing through the office like the final note of a song. When the last of them were gone, I sat alone at the table with the will still in front of me. My hands rested on the smooth paper, and for the first time in months, I felt a deep sense of peace. Mom's voice had carried through the noise, louder than Lucas's lies, stronger than his manipulation. She'd trusted me, and I hadn't let her down. I gathered my things and walked outside. The late summer heat hit me again, but it felt different this time. Lighter, like a burden had been lifted. As I stood there, I glanced up at the sky, the sunlight filtering through the clouds, and whispered, "Thank you, Mom." Then I turned and walked down the steps, leaving Lucas's anger and lies behind me for good. And that was the last time he ever held power over me. "Hey Reddit, call me Jess. I'm 27, work in IT, and live in a mid-sized apartment in a quiet part of the city. Not a luxury high-rise or anything, but it's mine, or at least the lease is in my name. I've been living here for nearly 2 years, and until recently, I had a pretty chill life. Work, gym, Netflix, the occasional night out. I like my peace. I paid my bills on time. I folded my laundry right after it came out of the dryer. Yeah, I'm that person." Life was steady, maybe even boring, until my roommate's one-night guest turned it all upside down. So let me rewind just a bit. I got the apartment after a bad breakup. It was one of those splits where we divided furniture, playlists, and even our shared friend group. I wanted a clean slate, and I found this cozy 2-bedroom with a decent-sized kitchen and a little balcony that faced the sunrise. I moved in solo, but after 6 months, I realized rent was kind of a beast to shoulder alone, especially in this economy. That's when I decided to look for a roommate. Enter Marissa. Marissa was 25, studying for her nursing boards, and seemed normal enough during our initial meetup. She liked quiet nights, paid her share on time, and made good pesto pasta. We got along decently well. We weren't besties who shared shoes and secrets, but we were comfortable. She moved in that spring, and for the first few months, everything was smooth sailing. Then came Alex. I met Alex one Saturday afternoon when I was doing my usual deep cleaning routine. Marissa was sitting on the couch, legs crossed, scrolling on her phone, and beside her was this guy I didn't recognize, tall, smug-looking, and wearing one of those ironic graphic tees that say something like, "I paused my game to be here." "Oh, hey," she said, like I wasn't holding a mop and glaring at the dirt in the corners. "This is Alex, my boyfriend." Alex gave me a curt nod, but didn't bother standing or saying much else. "Hi," I said, mildly surprised. I hadn't known she was seeing anyone. "Is he, staying for dinner or?" "He's just crashing for the night," she said quickly. "His place is getting fumigated. One night max." I shrugged. "Not my business." "Cool," I said, and returned to vacuuming the living room while he proceeded to put his feet on the coffee table. Strike one. That one night stretched into 2, then 4, then 10. After a week, I asked Marissa casually, "Hey, is Alex still having issues at his place?" She hesitated. "Yeah, kind of. He might need a few more days." A few more days became indefinite. By the end of week 3, his toothbrush was in the bathroom, his socks were on the hallway floor, and his laptop charger was permanently plugged into the wall near our dining table. I confronted her again, more directly this time. "Marissa, I need to know, how long is Alex planning to stay?" She looked up from her textbook, visibly annoyed. "I don't know, Jess. He doesn't have a place right now. His lease ended and he's between jobs. What do you want me to do? Kick him to the curb? I want him to contribute to rent if he's going to live here," I said, keeping my voice calm but firm. "Or at least utilities. He's using water, electricity, and I've noticed the groceries have been disappearing faster than usual." She rolled her eyes. "He's going through a lot right now. You could be a little more understanding." That was the first real crack in our roommate relationship. But I didn't push further, at least not yet. I figured if he was truly between leases, maybe he'd be gone soon. Maybe this was just a rough patch. I didn't want to be heartless. But over the next few weeks, it became clear that Alex had no intention of leaving. He wasn't job hunting. He wasn't apartment shopping. He was home. My home. He started leaving his dishes in the sink. He took my almond milk and drank straight from the carton. He hogged the bathroom in the mornings and had the audacity to leave the seat up. And if that wasn't enough, one day he just rearranged the living room without asking me or Marissa. I came home to find the couch against a different wall, my reading lamp missing, and a gaming chair in the corner that absolutely did not match our decor. "What happened here?" I asked, stunned. Alex, holding a controller, barely looked up. I optimized the layout. Better for the TV angle. I blinked. "You what?" "Relax," he said. "It's a shared space." I stood there, fuming, while Marissa tried to smooth things over. "He just moved a few things. We can put them back if it bothers you." "It's not about the furniture," I snapped. "It's the fact that he thinks he can waltz in and start running the place without so much as a conversation." Alex, ever the charmer, scoffed. "Maybe if you weren't so uptight, you'd see it looks better this way." That was the moment I started taking mental notes. I wasn't just irritated anymore. I was on a mission, but I stayed quiet, observed, waited. Because if there's one thing working in IT has taught me, it's that documentation is power. And if this was going to end in confrontation, I wanted receipts. So I started keeping a record. Every day Alex stayed. Every meal he consumed. Every utility spike. Every passive-aggressive comment. Every item of mine he used without asking. I took photos, wrote timestamps, and tracked everything. It might sound obsessive, but I knew something was coming. I just didn't know when. And then, exactly 3 months from the day he first crashed for a night, the absurd happened. I came home after work, kicked off my shoes, and found a manila envelope on the counter with my name on it. Inside, a printed document titled Shared Household Contribution Agreement. It was from Alex. I swear I'm not making this up. The document, clearly typed by him and signed only by him, outlined how, since I shared the space with 2 individuals, I should now be paying 1/3 of the rent instead of half. It went on to say that he would begin collecting from me at the start of next month, and that I should please have my portion ready in cash or transfer. He had even added his Venmo at the bottom. I stared at it, blinking, trying to process the audacity of this man. I took the paper, walked into the living room where he was. What else? Playing video games, and held it up. "What is this?" He didn't pause the game. A rent adjustment. Fair's fair. Fair. I repeated. You don't even live here legally. Your name's not on the lease. You've been freeloading for 3 months, and now you think I owe you money. He put the controller down and turned to me, smug as ever. Look, Jess, I've been contributing. I cleaned the bathroom last week, and I reorganized the living room. If anything, you owe me. That was it. I didn't yell. I didn't throw things. I just smiled, said, thanks for the clarification, and walked away. Because now, I had everything I needed. The next day, I drafted something of my own. Not a passive-aggressive note. Not a confrontation. Something a little more formal. And it had teeth. But I'll get to that. Because first, I had to pay someone a visit. The next morning, I took a personal day from work. Not out of stress. I was weirdly energized, like someone had hit a switch. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about reclaiming my home. My life. And step 1 meant paying a little visit to my landlord. Now, quick side note. My landlord, Mr. Gelman, is in his late 60s, runs a few small properties across the city, and is basically allergic to technology. Think, handwritten receipts, landline phone, a thick accent, and a suit that looks like it was tailored during the Nixon administration. But he's fair, old school, and more importantly, by the book. I showed up at his office unannounced, carrying a folder with my notes, printed photos, and screenshots of every Venmo request, every group text, and a list of dates. He was in the middle of eating a sandwich when I walked in. Jessica, he said, wiping mayo off his tie. You okay? You don't usually come by in person. I have a problem, I said, sitting down across from him. And I think you're going to want to know about it. I laid out everything. Who Alex was. How long he'd been there. That he wasn't on the lease. That he'd never applied. That he had started demanding rent from me. Gelman's eyebrows slowly climbed toward his hairline as I flipped page after page. He's an unauthorized occupant, I said. Technically, I could be in violation of my lease for letting him stay. You could, he nodded, slowly. But if you're not the one letting him stay, then it's not on you. Exactly, I said. I want him out. I want both of them out. He leaned back in his creaky leather chair and tapped the folder. You documented all this yourself? Every bit. Gelman whistled softly. You'd make a good property manager. All right. I'll serve an official notice. But you'll have to give me a couple days. I don't mind, I said. But I'd like to follow it up with something more dramatic. He raised an eyebrow. What are you thinking? That was when I laid out my twist. It wasn't illegal. It wasn't cruel. But it would sting. Gelman chuckled the entire time I explained it. At one point he muttered, remind me never to get on your bad side. I left the office that day with a bounce in my step. But that was just part of it. Back at home, things were as obnoxious as ever. Alex had taken to calling himself the man of the house like we were living in some kind of 1950s sitcom. I caught him opening my Amazon packages once, and when I confronted him, he said, oh, relax. I thought it was for the apartment. Marissa just shrugged and said he didn't mean anything by it. Meanwhile, I had to relabel my leftovers and hide my oat milk like I was back in college. Then came the real kicker. One night, I walked into the kitchen to find my own mug, a ceramic blue one I got from a craft fair, shattered in the sink. Alex was at the table eating cereal. You break my mug? He didn't even flinch. Yeah, my bad. Slipped when I was rinsing it. I stared at him. That was mine. You didn't even say anything. He shrugged. It's just a mug. I think that moment, more than anything else, was when I stopped seeing Alex as a parasite and started seeing him as a virus. One that needed to be removed carefully, with precision and gloves. 2 days later, Mr. Gelman delivered the official notice, a formal cure or quit letter addressed to Marissa only, stating that she had 10 days to remove any unauthorized occupants or face termination of tenancy. It was taped right to the front door. I wasn't home when they saw it, but I got a flurry of texts from Marissa. What is wrong with you? Did you go behind my back to the landlord? Jess, seriously, we could have talked. I didn't reply. I waited until I got home. When I walked through the door that evening, the atmosphere was thick. Marissa was pacing the hallway, clearly fuming. Alex was slumped on the couch, arms crossed. You went to the landlord? Marissa snapped, stepping in front of me. Without even talking to me? I did talk to you, I said, calmly hanging up my coat. Multiple times. You just ignored me. So you're getting me evicted? No, I said. You're getting yourself evicted. He's not on the lease. That's your problem. Alex scoffed. You're being a child. No, I said, turning to him. You've been squatting in my home for 3 months. You've cost me money, time, and peace. And now you're pretending you have some legal claim to my space? I do contribute, he shot back. I help keep things running. You broke my mug and rearranged my furniture, I said. That's not contribution. That's invasion. I'll talk to Gelman, Marissa said, crossing her arms. He'll understand. You can try, I said, walking past them. But you've got 8 days now. They didn't speak to me for the rest of the night, which was fine, because while they were sulking and scrambling, I was preparing the second half of my plan. You see, I hadn't just spoken to the landlord. I'd also been making a few legal inquiries of my own. Turns out, there's a little-known clause in our lease about interference with quiet enjoyment of the premises. It's usually buried in legalese, but it basically says if someone significantly disrupts your ability to live peacefully in your home, the landlord must take action, or you can take legal steps of your own. And I wasn't just planning to use it. I was planning to weaponize it. But before I pulled that trigger, I had one more trick up my sleeve. It was the kind of move you save for when the opponent thinks they've still got a fighting chance. The kind that ends conversations, shifts power, and it involved a formal envelope, a letterhead, and a signature that would make both of them panic. Because if they thought the landlord notice was bad, they hadn't seen anything yet. See, it wasn't just about getting them out. I wanted this to be memorable. I wanted them to feel every ounce of their entitled behavior come back like a boomerang. That's when I started crafting my second weapon, one that had nothing to do with the landlord and everything to do with leverage. Now, let me explain something about Alex. This man was loud about how the system was broken and how people who worked 9 to 5s were slaves to the machine. He said this, by the way, while using his dad's old Amex card to buy gaming chairs and Uber Eats. The man lived in a constant state of hypocritical delusion. And that's where I found my opening. A couple weeks into his stay, I noticed he had packages coming in regularly under Marissa's name, but the stuff wasn't hers. I once saw him open a small box with a label from some dropshipping company. When I asked casually, he told me he was testing a side hustle. Then one day, curiosity got the better of me, and I did a little digital digging. I searched the return address on one of his packages and found it linked to a low-quality eBay storefront selling knockoff electronics, shipped from our exact address. He was running a whole shady resale operation right under my nose, using our apartment as a distribution hub. I couldn't believe it. I didn't confront him, not yet. Instead, I started documenting this too. Photos of packages, screenshots of the store, delivery logs, even video from our hallway camera. We had a Ring peephole viewer because, ironically, Marissa wanted to feel safer when we first moved in. Then I reached out to an acquaintance of mine. Let's call her Priya. She works in compliance for a major online retail platform. I didn't ask her to do anything shady, just for some general insight into how these cases were handled. She told me if he was shipping out faulty or counterfeit items, and I had proof he was doing it from our address, it could be reported under a consumer fraud claim. Even if I didn't pursue anything legally, just the threat of reporting it could be enough to light a fire under him. So I drafted a formal letter. Not from me, from a consumer protection attorney. I used a real template, thank you, legal Reddit, and inserted all the necessary phrasing. Unauthorized business activity, potential fraud, pending consumer complaint, federal reporting agency, and my personal favorite. Cease and desist demand pending investigation. I printed it on heavy linen paper. Inserted it into an envelope with a typed address. No return name. Just an official-looking letterhead with a mock legal firm name I generated from a law firm name generator online. Then I waited. The next morning, I made sure to leave the envelope on the kitchen counter, right where Alex would find it. I even placed it on top of his cereal box so he'd have no choice but to pick it up. And oh, he picked it up. I was sitting in my room with the door cracked when I heard it. The shuffle of the envelope. The pause. Then the tearing of paper. A beat of silence. Then, what is this? He stomped down the hallway toward Marissa's room. I peeked just slightly out and saw him holding the letter, face pale. They're investigating me, he hissed. Marissa sounded half asleep. What are you talking about? This. Some law office sent a letter. Says I'm being reported for fraud. Did you tell someone about the store? Marissa mumbled something, and I couldn't hear her reply. But the panic had started. It was setting in. I heard Alex storming back and forth for an hour after that. Doors opening and closing. He was on the phone, trying to get someone, anyone, to explain what was going on. The best part? He still didn't know I was behind it. By that evening, he was in full paranoia mode. He'd shoved all his packages into black trash bags and was muttering something about needing to find a P.O. box. I stayed in my room, pretending to work, while sipping my tea and listening to the chaos. But that's when things really started to crack. Because instead of Marissa backing him up, I started noticing tension between them. She was annoyed, tired, defensive. She started spending more time in her room. She even asked me, if I'd mind if she hosted a quiet night with some friends in the living room because she needed a break from the testosterone. I told her I'd be out that night, and she actually smiled. Alex didn't like that. I think he could tell the walls were closing in. His little kingdom of entitlement was crumbling, and he had nowhere else to go. I overheard him asking Marissa if they could just move somewhere new and start over, like they were on the run from the law. She told him to calm down. Then he dropped this gem. She's probably the one who called the lawyer. Silence. Then, you think just did this? Alex said, she's petty enough. Marissa, she's not petty, she's organized. There's a difference. That one made me laugh. But here's where things took a turn I wasn't expecting. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen and found Marissa alone, no Alex in sight. She was staring into her coffee like it had told her bad news. She looked up at me and said, quietly, I think he's going to do something stupid. I didn't respond. Just waited. She looked down at the mug again. He's talking about getting you kicked out. Now I was interested. Really? I said. And how's he planning to do that? I don't know, she said. But he mentioned calling the landlord. Said he has proof that you've been harassing him and creating a hostile environment. That was when I realized this might go deeper than a revenge plan. Alex wasn't just a freeloader anymore. He was strategizing. But so was I. I nodded slowly. Thanks for telling me, I said, my tone neutral. She looked up. I didn't say it for you. I said it because I don't want to be homeless. And with that, she left the room. Which brings me to now. Alex has no idea I'm 2 steps ahead. That I have everything from the roommate agreement to the unauthorized business to audio recordings of his threats ready to go. He thinks he's in control. He's wrong. The day everything came to a head, the apartment was unnaturally quiet. The kind of quiet that hums in your ears. You could feel it, like pressure before a storm. Marissa had been avoiding eye contact for days. Alex, meanwhile, was riding the high of what he thought was a genius plan, his supposed evidence against me. He was pacing around the apartment like he'd already won, smirking, making himself eggs with my olive oil, sitting in my chair like a king waiting to claim land he didn't own. He had no idea he was already checkmated. The night before, I overheard him on the phone in the hallway, talking just loud enough for me to hear. He wanted me to hear it. That faux confidence again, thick and clumsy like everything else he did. She's done, he said. I've got a recording of her threatening me. I'm sending it to the landlord in the morning. He was talking about a conversation we did where I'd told him calmly that if he wasn't out by the 15th, I'd escalate it legally. Apparently, that counted as a threat now. He was really counting on that little bluff. Let him. The next morning, 11 a.m. sharp, Mr. Gelman knocked on the door. I opened it like I'd been expecting royalty. Offered him coffee, walked him into the kitchen. He declined, of course. He always declined. A minute later, Alex sauntered in, posture cocky, shirt half-tucked. He looked at Gelman like he was a panelist on some reality show. Glad you could make it, he said. We've got some things to sort out. Mr. Gelman stared at him for half a beat longer than was polite. Then turned to me. You said you had something to show me? I did. I pulled out the folder I'd been working on for weeks. Thick, color-coded. It thunked when I dropped it on the table. Inside, the eBay storefront Alex was running from our address. Product photos. Tracking numbers. Photos of the boxes piled in our living room. Delivery schedules. Video stills from the hallway camera of him packaging items. Screenshots of messages where he called himself a small business owner. And best of all, a printed list of all the names and aliases he'd used to register accounts, some tied directly to our unit's mailing address. But that wasn't the only thing in the folder. Behind it, I'd also added a few personal touches. A copy of the fake legal letter I'd crafted weeks ago, the one that sent Alex into a tailspin. A timeline of all 3 months he had lived there rent-free. A signed witness statement. Yes, signed from Marissa, admitting he'd been living there full-time and had been increasingly aggressive. Gilman read through it all without saying a word. Occasionally, he grunted. Once, he squinted and muttered, Jesus. Alex stood there, arms crossed, trying to read upside down. She's manipulating this whole thing, he blurted. She's been hostile since day one. I recorded her threatening me. I've got proof too. Gilman closed the folder and looked at him. "You're not on the lease," he said, flatly. "You're not authorized to live here. You're not even a tenant. You've been running a business out of my property without permission. That alone is grounds for immediate removal." Alex's smirk twitched, but Gelman raised his hand. "If you're not gone by noon tomorrow, I'll file an unlawful detainer and pursue damages. That'll be on your record. Trust me, it'll follow you. And good luck explaining that to any landlord in the city." Alex's jaw clenched, but he didn't say anything. He just stood there. I don't think he'd ever been told no by someone who could enforce it before. Gelman stood up, gave me a small nod. "I'll expect confirmation tomorrow." Then he left. The moment the door closed behind him, Alex turned to me, but whatever angry retort he had planned died in his throat. I didn't say a word, just raised my coffee mug, the one he hadn't broken, and took a sip. Marissa didn't come out of her room. I don't know if she was ashamed or scared or just didn't want to face either of us. But that night, I heard them arguing. Not just bickering, arguing. Him yelling, her sobbing. It went on for over an hour. Something about betrayal. Something about, "You let her do this." The next morning, Alex was gone. No goodbye. No apology. No passive-aggressive note. Just gone. He left behind a half-filled trash bag, a broken phone charger, and a carton of almond milk I'd marked with my name weeks ago. Fitting. Marissa stayed another few weeks. She tried, in her own awkward way, to patch things up. Apologized once, kind of. Said she didn't know it would get so toxic. That she thought he'd grow out of it. I told her I hoped she learned something from it. She didn't answer. 3 weeks later, she packed up and left. Quietly. No drama. She texted me a week after that, asking if I could mail her a stack of nursing books she'd left behind. I didn't reply. These days, it's just me again. The apartment is quiet. Still. Clean. There's no one gaming at 2 a.m. with the volume blasting. No weird packages. No power struggles over the thermostat or whose milk is in the fridge. Just me, my playlists, and my sunlight on the balcony. And I sleep better. Sometimes I wonder what Alex is doing now. Probably trying to find a new couch to live on. Maybe telling someone else how he was wronged. Painting himself as the victim. It doesn't really matter. Let me know your thoughts on this. My name's Eric, I'm 27, and if there's one thing I've learned, it's that family events bring out the absolute worst in people. You know those moments where everyone's dressed up, smiling for photos, pretending to be one big happy family. But underneath it all, you can feel the cracks? That was exactly the atmosphere at my sister's wedding. It was supposed to be her day, a celebration of love and joy. But for me, it turned into a night I'll never forget, and not for the reasons you'd expect. I'd always had a complicated relationship with my family. My sister, Emma, and I were close when we were kids, but as we grew older, it felt like I became more of an afterthought. She was the golden child, charming, outspoken, and always knew how to win people over. I, on the other hand, was quieter, more reserved. I built my life step by step, working hard, keeping my head down. It didn't matter that I had built a stable career for myself or that I'd been the one to quietly pay for things in the family when money was tight. Somehow, none of that ever seemed to measure up in their eyes. Emma was the star, and I was just there. The wedding was extravagant, more than I expected, honestly. White roses lined the aisles, the tables shimmered under chandeliers, and everyone was dressed to the nines. I was happy for her, truly, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel like an outsider sitting at that family table. I caught snippets of conversations where relatives gushed about how beautiful Emma looked, how proud my parents must be, and how this day would go down as one of the best in family history. My name didn't come up once, not even in passing. I told myself I didn't care, that I was just there to support my sister. But deep down, the neglect stung more than I wanted to admit. Then came the toasts. The best man stood up, gave a heartfelt speech that had everyone laughing and dabbing at their eyes. My parents gave their blessings with warm smiles. Even my younger cousin, who had barely spoken to Emma in years, got up and rambled on about how proud he was of her. I sat there with my glass in hand, nerves crawling under my skin, debating whether I should stand and say something too. I wasn't much of a public speaker, but I wanted to. Emma and I had memories, real ones, that no one else could share. If nothing else, I wanted her to know that I was proud of her in my own quiet way. So I stood. I held my glass up, cleared my throat, and just as I opened my mouth, I heard a voice slice through the room like a knife. Sit down, Eric. No one cares what you have to say. It was my uncle. Loud, sharp, cruel enough that people actually laughed. A few chuckles at first, then awkward glances when they realized he wasn't joking. The microphone hadn't even been in my hand, but his words carried clear enough that they might as well have been blasted through the speakers. My throat went dry. My hand trembled around the glass, the champagne rippling against the rim. I felt every set of eyes turn on me, not with warmth, not with curiosity, but with pity. Pity. For a moment, I thought about sitting back down, just swallowing it, pretending it didn't matter, letting the moment pass. But something in me shifted. The humiliation burned hotter than I'd ever felt before, crawling up my chest and making my ears ring. My uncle's smug grin, the way my father smirked at the remark instead of stepping in, the silence from my sister, it all sank into me like a stone. That's when I decided, in that very instant, that this night would not be remembered the way they thought it would. If they wanted to humiliate me, if they wanted to pretend I didn't matter, then I'd make sure they never forgot who I really was. I lowered the glass slowly, forcing my expression into something calm, almost unreadable. My heart was pounding so loud I could hear it over the low hum of whispers around the room. My uncle had no idea what he'd just set in motion. None of them did. And that was the moment I began planning exactly how I'd make them all remember this night forever. I didn't sit down. Not right away. Instead, I forced a smile, the kind you wear when you've just been slapped across the face, but you don't want to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing you break. I looked at my uncle for a second longer than was comfortable, as if daring him to say it again, then quietly lowered my glass and returned to my seat. My heart was racing, my palms damp against the cool stem of the glass, but on the outside, I made sure I looked calm. That was my first small victory, not letting him see me crumble. The rest of the room, though, carried on like nothing had happened. That's what stung the most. The best man chuckled awkwardly and muttered something about keeping things moving. My dad leaned over to clap my uncle on the shoulder, like he'd just told the best joke of the night. My mom shook her head with a smile, whispering, "Oh, that's just how he is, Eric. Don't take it so seriously." Even Emma didn't step in. She just looked down at her bouquet and gave a tight-lipped smile, the kind you give when you don't want to ruin your makeup by frowning too hard. I sat there, the champagne untouched, my mind replaying the moment over and over like a loop I couldn't turn off. I thought about every family gathering before this one. Every time my uncle dismissed me, every time my dad compared me to someone else, every time my mom told me I should just let things go. And here it was again, amplified in front of 100 people. As the night moved on, little things piled on top of each other, making the sting sharper. When the photographer came around to snap pictures of the family, I stood up, ready to take my place beside my sister. But my dad waved me off. "Just the important ones first," he said with a grin, ushering my uncle, aunt, and cousins into the shot while I stood off to the side, pretending to check my phone. By the time I was finally called in, it was more of an afterthought, like they were adding me in just so no one could say I'd been excluded entirely. At the dinner table, the favoritism was blatant. My uncle was seated right at the head with my parents, laughing loudly, retelling the same stories I'd heard 100 times. I was placed 2 tables away, squeezed in with distant relatives who barely remembered my name. When I finally tried to join a conversation at my parents' table, my uncle cut across me again, raising his voice so mine was drowned out completely. "No offense, Eric," he said loudly, "but some of us are actually interesting." That got him another round of laughs. And Emma? She didn't say a word. She just smiled that practiced smile of hers and let it happen. The real blow, though, came during the bouquet toss. I'd stepped back to give the women space, but I couldn't help overhearing my mom's voice carry across the room. "I'm just so proud of Emma," she gushed to a family friend. "She's always been the shining star. Eric, well, he's fine, but you know how it is. Some kids just make you proud in a different way." I froze, my chest tightening as though someone had gripped my lungs. It wasn't the first time she'd said something like that, but hearing it in that moment, on this night, when I was already raw and humiliated, it cut deeper than ever before. I excused myself, slipping out onto the balcony for air. The night sky stretched above me, clear and cold, the laughter and music muffled behind the glass doors. I gripped the railing, breathing slowly, trying to shake the anger that buzzed under my skin. I told myself I shouldn't let it get to me, that this was Emma's day, not mine. But the truth? I couldn't stop replaying it all. The toast I never gave, the photos I wasn't in, the mocking laughter, the words, "No one cares what you have to say." I realized then that this wasn't just one bad night. This was years of being dismissed, belittled, and overlooked, all boiling over. And the more I thought about it, the more one thought solidified in my mind. If they wanted to treat me like I was invisible, then I was going to make sure they'd never forget me. Not after tonight. And as I stood out there in the cold, my uncle's voice echoing in my head, I started thinking about exactly how I'd do it. When I finally went back inside, the ballroom was buzzing with music and laughter. The band had started playing one of those songs everyone knows the words to, and people were shouting along, drinks in hand, shoes already kicked off under tables. For a moment, I thought maybe I could just blend back in, ride out the rest of the night quietly, and leave early. But fate has a cruel way of circling back around just when you think you've escaped. The family speeches portion wasn't officially over. After the cake cutting, Emma's new husband's parents gave another toast, and then a few relatives started chiming in with short blessings and jokes. That's when my uncle, clearly drunk but still steady enough to command the room, decided to take the mic again. "I just want to say," he began, his voice booming over the speakers, "that tonight is about Emma. She's always been the heart of this family, the one we're proud to show off. And frankly," he glanced toward me, smirking, like he was about to serve himself a second helping of humiliation, "it's nice to have a child worth celebrating." The crowd laughed. Loud, unrestrained laughter this time. People clapped. A few even raised their glasses. I froze in my chair, every muscle in my body tightening. He had said it directly this time, not disguised as a joke, not hidden under clever phrasing. A child worth celebrating. Which meant, of course, that I wasn't. I looked at my parents, hoping, just for once, they'd shut him down. But my father actually nodded, grinning like my uncle had just spoken a universal truth. My mother leaned toward him and whispered something that made him laugh harder. Even Emma, my sister, the one whose day this was, the one I thought might at least step in to keep things from getting uglier, simply lowered her eyes, fiddling with her ring, and let the silence stretch. That was the moment something in me snapped. Because it wasn't just the toast, or the laughter, or even my parents' silence. It was everything behind it. The years of being invisible. The childhood memories where Emma got the bigger presents, the louder praise, the gentler punishment. The teenage years where every accomplishment of mine was met with "that's nice, but look what Emma did." The college graduation where my parents barely showed up, but flew across the country for one of Emma's work promotions. And now, at her wedding, when I had stood up to say something kind, something from the heart, I had been told to sit down because no one cared. I realized then that it wasn't about Emma's day, or keeping the peace, or letting things slide because that's just how Uncle is. It was about the fact that they didn't respect me. They never had. And if I didn't do something, they never would. The emotional turning point came seconds later. I don't even think my uncle realized how far he'd gone, but he sealed it when he leaned into the mic and added, with a sloppy grin, "Maybe one day Eric will give us something to celebrate. But I won't hold my breath." The crowd roared again. My dad clapped the table, red in the face from laughing so hard. And I sat there with my hands gripping the edge of my chair so tightly my knuckles went white, my mind spiraling between rage and hurt. My chest burned. My ears buzzed. That was it. That was the breaking point. Not just humiliation anymore, betrayal. Betrayal from the people who were supposed to defend me, to at least offer me dignity, if nothing else. My uncle's cruelty was one thing. My parents' agreement with him was another. Emma's silence, that was the knife in my back. I didn't stand up. Not yet. I didn't storm out, didn't yell, didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me unravel. Instead, I forced my body to stay perfectly still, my expression carefully blank. Because in that moment, with the music rising again and the clinking of glasses all around me, I realized something important. I finally knew exactly where I stood with my family. And knowing that gave me power. I looked down at the untouched champagne in my hand, the bubbles fizzing quietly, and I made a decision. If they wanted to laugh, if they wanted to pretend I was nothing, then I would give them a reason to remember me for the rest of their lives. The plan wasn't clear yet, but the intent was. And as I sat there, every cruel word echoing in my mind, I began to map out how this night would end, on my terms, not theirs. I stayed in that chair longer than I should have, my champagne still untouched, the bubbles long gone flat. The music swelled back into the room, laughter picked up again, and people drifted toward the dance floor as if nothing had happened. To everyone else, it was just another speech, another joke at my expense. But inside me, it felt like something had splintered. I didn't feel anger anymore, not in the sharp, burning way I had a few minutes before. Instead, it was something colder, heavier. I excused myself quietly, slipping away from the table without anyone noticing. Or maybe they did notice, and they just didn't care. That was the part that sank the deepest, realizing that if I left entirely, if I walked out into the night and never came back, the only reaction I'd get would be a shrug or another joke. For the first time, I truly felt invisible, like a ghost drifting through the edges of my own family. I ended up in a small lounge off to the side of the ballroom. Dim lighting, plush chairs, and just enough quiet that I could hear my own thoughts again. I sat down heavily, running my hands through my hair, the weight of it all pressing down on me. I thought about the toast I'd wanted to give, how I had planned to remind Emma of the summer nights we used to stay up late talking about our futures, or the way she used to braid my hair when we were kids, or how proud I really was that she had found someone who loved her enough to stand at the altar with her. I had wanted to give her something meaningful, something she'd carry into her marriage. Instead, my words had been stolen before they ever left my mouth. That was my rock bottom, realizing not only that my family didn't care, but that my own sister didn't care enough to stop them. The night blurred from there. I wandered between the lounge and the balcony, occasionally drifting back into the ballroom just to watch from the edges. I saw my uncle laughing at the center of every conversation. I saw my parents proudly parading him around like he was the star of the show. I saw Emma dancing with her husband, glowing under the lights, her eyes never once searching for me in the crowd. And every time I slipped out of sight again, it felt easier, like I was training myself to disappear altogether. But disappearing wasn't what I wanted. Not really. I wanted them to feel what I had felt, to know what it was like to be silenced, dismissed, cut out of the picture. I wanted them to sit with the weight of their own cruelty, the way I had sat with it all my life. I didn't know how yet, but sitting in that quiet lounge, watching the shadows move across the walls, a strange calm began to settle over me. My humiliation had hit its peak, my heart had broken, and now all that was left was a sharp, deliberate clarity. If I couldn't have a place in their family the way things were, then I would carve out a place in a way they would never forget. I pulled out my phone and scrolled absently, not looking for anything in particular. But my mind was working in the background, faster and sharper than it had in years. Little details from the night began to stitch themselves into something bigger. My uncle's arrogance, my parents' favoritism, Emma's silence, all of it was fuel. And though I didn't have the full picture yet, the seed of a plan was starting to take root. When I finally returned to the ballroom, I didn't try to rejoin the family table. I stayed near the edges, watching, waiting, keeping my thoughts to myself. No one came looking for me. No one asked where I'd been. That hurt, yes, but it also told me something important. They weren't paying attention, which meant when I finally moved, when I finally acted, it would blindside them completely. I raised the flat champagne to my lips, swallowed it in one bitter gulp, and let the glass fall back to the table with a quiet clink. In that moment, I promised myself I wouldn't be invisible anymore. The days after the wedding felt like walking through fog. My phone buzzed with group chats full of photos and inside jokes from the night, and each time I scrolled through them, I saw myself missing from frame after frame. My uncle's arm was around Emma in half of them, my parents beaming in the background, cousins clinking glasses. If I appeared at all, it was on the edge, blurry, half-turned, like I was just a stranger who'd wandered into the shot. Nobody messaged me directly, not even Emma. Not a thank you for coming, not a sorry about what happened, not even a throwaway emoji. Silence. I won't lie, it crushed me at first. For a few weeks, I drifted. I went to work, came home, kept to myself. I replayed the humiliation over and over, wondering if I should have shouted back, if I should have made a scene to prove I wasn't weak. But eventually, something shifted. The silence gave me clarity. And in that clarity, I started focusing on myself in a way I never had before. See, I had been coasting for years, doing fine, paying my bills, showing up for a job I was good at but not passionate about. But the wedding lit a fire under me. That moment, being told no one cares what you have to say, dug into me so deeply that it became a challenge I couldn't ignore. If they didn't care, then I would give them no choice but to care. So I worked. Quietly, steadily, relentlessly. I poured myself into my career, volunteering for projects no one else wanted, staying late, sharpening my skills. I networked outside of work, too, building connections that didn't tie back to my family's circle. Within a year, I got promoted. Then promoted again. My salary doubled, then nearly tripled. I moved into a sleek apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows, the kind of place I used to drive past and wonder what it would be like to live there. But it wasn't just money. I grew in confidence. I started working out, not because anyone told me to, but because I wanted to feel strong in my own skin. I made friends outside of my family, people who actually valued my presence, who laughed at my jokes instead of talking over me. For the first time in my life, I stopped measuring myself by the yardstick my parents and uncle had shoved in my face. I was free. Emma, meanwhile, drifted in and out of my periphery. I saw her posts online, the honeymoon pictures, the first house with her husband, the smiling family dinners where my seat was conspicuously empty. We didn't talk much. And when we did, it was shallow. She never brought up the wedding. She never apologized. Part of me had hoped she would, but another part knew better. What surprised me, though, was how often my parents started reaching out once my career took off. It began with casual texts, "How's work? We should get together soon." Then it escalated into dinner invitations, thinly veiled questions about how much I was earning, little comments about how successful you've become, Eric. It was flattering, in a bitter sort of way, but I saw through it. They weren't proud. They were curious. Curious what they could gain. The first real test came at Thanksgiving, 2 years after Emma's wedding. I showed up in a tailored suit, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to. My uncle was there, of course, holding court at the head of the table, but this time when he smirked at me, it didn't sting. If anything, I felt a strange satisfaction in watching his eyes flicker over the watch on my wrist, the car keys I set down casually beside my plate. "Oh, Eric," he said, raising his glass with that same oily grin. "Glad to see you finally doing something with yourself." This time, I didn't flinch. I smiled back, slow and measured, and replied, "Glad you noticed." It wasn't revenge yet, not even close, but it was the first time the balance of power tilted, even just slightly, in my favor. I could feel it in the way the room shifted, the way my parents leaned in to ask me about my job, the way my uncle suddenly seemed eager to hear about the projects I was working on. That's when I realized they had underestimated me for years. And now, for the first time, I held something they wanted. I didn't give it to them. Not yet. I just let the silence hang, let them wonder how far I'd climbed, how much further I could go. Because I knew, deep down, that the time would come when I could use all of this, the success, the distance, the power I had built, to turn the tables completely. And when that moment came, I wasn't going to hold back. It was subtle at first, the way the shift happened. My family's calls, once rare and dismissive, became more frequent. My dad would ring me on Sunday mornings, his voice casual but laced with questions. "How's work, son?" Still climbing that ladder. My mom started dropping hints about the old house needing a little renovation, slipping in comments about how much it would cost. Even Emma, who had barely spoken to me since her wedding, sent a text one evening. "Hey, we should catch up soon. It's been too long." I knew what it meant. They had seen the changes, my lifestyle, my success, the way people outside our family began to respect me. I wasn't invisible anymore, at least not in the way I had been before. But they didn't want me because they suddenly cared. They wanted me because I had something to offer. The confirmation came one night at dinner. My parents had invited me to a family meeting, which already set off alarms in my head. I arrived to find my uncle there too, grinning like always, Emma beside him with that perfect practice smile. The table was set neatly, wine glasses filled, as though they were preparing to celebrate something. But the celebration wasn't mine. After some polite chatter, my dad finally cleared his throat. "Eric, we're so proud of how far you've come. Truly, you've made something of yourself, and it hasn't gone unnoticed." He paused for effect, his eyes flicking to my uncle, then back to me. "Which is why we think you'd be the perfect person to help us with a little project." My uncle leaned in, lowering his voice like he was letting me in on some grand secret. "It's about the family business. We've had some financial strain lately. Nothing major, just a temporary setback. But with your position, your contacts, maybe even a small investment." He let the words hang in the air, as if waiting for me to jump at the chance to prove myself useful. I stayed silent, swirling the wine in my glass, letting the weight of their words settle. An investment. That's what this was about. Not pride. Not love. Money. Emma chimed in then, her voice soft, almost rehearsed. "It would mean a lot, Eric. You know how important stability is for the family. If you could just help us through this rough patch, it would bring us all closer together again." Closer together. The words made my stomach turn. For years, they had pushed me to the edges, mocked me, silenced me. And now, when their empire was wobbling, I was suddenly the perfect person. I smiled, slow and deliberate, and asked for details. Not because I intended to hand them a cent, but because information was power. As they spoke, numbers, debts, desperate plans, I listened carefully, filing it all away. My uncle boasted too much, as he always did, and in his arrogance, he revealed cracks I hadn't known were there. His business wasn't just struggling, it was crumbling. My parents were tied into it, financially and reputationally. Emma, too, had invested some of her husband's money. If it went down, it would drag them all with it. By the time dessert was served, I had everything I needed. I smiled politely, promised to think about it, and excused myself early. On the drive home, the city lights flickering past my windshield, I felt a cold satisfaction settle into me. They weren't invincible anymore. They were vulnerable, and they had just handed me the keys to their weak spots. That night, I opened my laptop and began researching. Connections, legal documents, financial records. All of it was easier to access than I'd expected, especially with the information my uncle had carelessly let slip. Each piece fit into a larger puzzle, and the more I uncovered, the more I realized just how much control I could have if I wanted it. For the first time in my life, the power dynamic had flipped completely. I wasn't the overlooked kid at the family table anymore. I wasn't the one told to sit down because no one cares what you have to say. I was the one holding the truth, the one with the ability to decide their future. And the best part? They had no idea. I didn't rush. That was the difference between anger and strategy. Anger makes you act in the moment, loud and sloppy, but strategy? Strategy waits. I let months pass after that dinner. My family kept circling back, each time with the same sugary smiles, the same veiled requests. "Any updates on that help we talked about, Eric?" my dad would ask casually. Emma's husband even called me once, trying to pitch the investment opportunity like I was some clueless banker who'd never seen a balance sheet before. I played along, nodded at dinners, answered politely, but never gave them a straight yes or no. The longer I kept them guessing, the more desperate they became. And during that time, I quietly moved my pieces into place. Through my work, I had made connections with people who specialized in, let's just say, corporate cleanups. For the right price, they could untangle any financial mess or, conversely, expose one to the public in ways that couldn't be ignored. I didn't even have to do much digging myself. Once I hinted at what I knew, the information practically poured in. My uncle's business wasn't just crumbling, it was rotten to the core. Shady bookkeeping, unpaid loans, and deals that would have regulators salivating if they ever came to light. And my parents? They had co-signed on more than one of those loans. Emma and her husband's names showed up, too. Piece by piece, I built a full picture of their empire and how fragile it really was. The first move was subtle. I let it slip, through a carefully chosen mutual acquaintance, that my uncle's company might be in trouble. Within weeks, whispers spread. A client backed out of a contract. A small investor pulled their support. My uncle blamed market changes, but the cracks were widening. The second move was a conversation. I invited Emma to lunch, just the two of us, for the first time since her wedding. She seemed nervous, fidgeting with her napkin, probably wondering if I was finally going to agree to bail them out. Instead, I smiled and asked her how much she and her husband had tied up in Uncle's company. Her eyes widened just a fraction, enough for me to know she hadn't expected me to know. I didn't press. I just let the silence linger, then changed the subject, leaving her to stew in the knowledge that I was aware of far more than she realized. The third move was the real blow. With the help of my connections, I funneled the information I had collected into the hands of someone who would make use of it. a journalist who had been sniffing around the local business scene for months. I didn't even have to sign my name. All it took was an anonymous packet, documents, timelines, numbers that didn't add up, and within weeks, the first article hit the press. Local family business under fire for financial misconduct. The headline exploded. Clients fled. Partners demanded answers. My uncle tried to laugh it off, to insist it was fake news, but the article included receipts. Actual receipts. The kind you couldn't spin your way out of. I watched it all unfold from the sidelines, calm as ever. My parents called me frantically when the news broke, voices high and panicked, asking if I knew anything. I kept my tone even, sympathetic even. That's awful. I hope you'll be okay. Emma texted me late one night, a single desperate line. Did you do this? I didn't reply. The fallout was swift. Contracts canceled, debts called in, reputations shredded. My uncle went from swaggering at the head of every family table to hiding behind lawyers and excuses. My parents, who had tied their finances to his, scrambled to cover losses, selling off assets they had bragged about for years. And Emma's marriage strained under the weight of the money they had poured into what turned out to be a sinking ship. And through it all, I stayed perfectly composed, attending family gatherings when invited, listening quietly as they whispered about their bad luck, offering nothing but a polite smile when my uncle tried to blame the world for his downfall. I never raised my voice. I never gloated. I didn't need to. The satisfaction wasn't in rubbing it in. It was in the silence, in watching them finally face the humiliation they had once so freely heaped on me. They had told me, at my sister's wedding, that no one cared what I had to say. Now, every whispered conversation in that family carried my shadow. Every glance in my direction was tinged with suspicion, fear, and the bitter acknowledgement that they had underestimated me. And that was exactly the way I wanted it. The fallout didn't just ripple through my family. It tore through them like a storm. The business, once my uncle's pride and joy, collapsed faster than anyone expected. Within months of that first article, regulators swooped in, auditors poured through records, and lawsuits started piling up. My uncle, the man who once stood at the head of every table with a booming voice and smug grin, was reduced to a ghost of himself. I'll never forget seeing him at a family gathering months later, thinner, shoulders slumped, his laugh gone. He barely looked at me. For the first time in my life, I think he was afraid of me. My parents didn't fare much better. Their finances, tied so tightly to his crumbling empire, drained quicker than they could patch the holes. The house they had flaunted for years went up for sale. Vacations disappeared. The proud, untouchable facade cracked until all that was left was desperation. And suddenly, those Sunday morning calls turned from casual check-ins to outright pleas. Eric, can you help us? Just until we get back on our feet. But the thing about asking for help is that it has to be built on respect, on love. They had given me neither. Emma's fallout was quieter, but in some ways harsher. Her husband had trusted her when she urged him to invest in the family business. When it all collapsed, so did his trust in her judgment. Their arguments spilled into public view, whispers reaching me through the grapevine. By the time I invited her to coffee again, the light in her eyes was dimmer, her voice brittle. You knew, didn't you? She said, not even asking. You could have warned me. I stirred my drink calmly before answering. I tried to speak once. You let them silence me. She didn't argue. She just lowered her gaze. And for once, there was no smile to hide behind. The most striking part of it all was the silence that followed. For years, I had been the quiet one, the afterthought, the one they dismissed at every turn. Now, the roles had reversed. At gatherings, they tread lightly around me, conversations halting when I entered the room. The man who once told me, no one cares what you have to say, avoided eye contact altogether. My parents, once so quick to parade my sister and uncle as their pride, now stumbled over their words when trying to compliment me, unsure how far they could go without sounding insincere. And I stayed calm, always calm. I didn't need to gloat or remind them of the past. They remembered. Every time their eyes met mine, they remembered. The final moment came at another wedding, not Emma's this time, but a cousin's. During the reception, the DJ invited family members to share toasts. I stayed seated at first, sipping my drink, letting the familiar nervous energy ripple through the room. And then, slowly I stood. The same way I had years ago at Emma's wedding. But this time, No one interrupted. No one dared. My uncle kept his head down. My parents watched me nervously. Emma sat rigid, hands clasped in her lap. I raised my glass, my voice steady, measured, calm. To family, I said simply. The people who remind us who we are, even when they don't mean to. And to those of us who had to learn the hard way that being silenced only makes your voice louder when the time finally comes. The room was silent. No laughter, no interruptions, just silence. And in that silence, I saw it land. The weight of it, the truth of it. I took a sip, set down my glass, and sat back down. For the first time in my life, they listened. And they would never forget. You're the reason this family's broken, my brother snapped, his voice slicing through the living room like glass on tile. I didn't flinch. I'd heard worse. But it was the next line that really hit me. My dad, seated on his usual spot on the recliner, added without looking up from his phone, "Things were better before you came back." He said it flatly, like stating a weather report. I didn't respond. I just stood there for a beat, letting the silence hang thick in the air, then grabbed my keys and walked out. I'm Evan. I'm 32. And I made the mistake of thinking time could heal something that was never really whole to begin with. 3 months earlier, I'd moved back home. Not because I wanted to, because I needed to. I had spent the last 10 years in Seattle, building a career in digital marketing, living in a tiny apartment with my dog, saving what I could. But then life happened fast. I lost my job during a round of sudden layoffs, then got hit by medical bills after a freak accident tore my ACL. I tried to hang on, but rent chewed through my savings faster than I could job hunt. Eventually, with no other choice, I made the call I had promised myself I never would. "Hey, Dad, I might need to come home for a bit." He paused before answering. "Well, it's not ideal, Evan, but we'll make it work. Don't expect much." That should have told me everything. When I arrived back at the house, my childhood home, nothing had changed. Same peeling wallpaper in the hallway. Same beige couch that had survived 2 dogs, 1 divorce, and 1 too many Thanksgiving fights. My younger brother Jake had never left. He was 29, technically employed by a consulting firm, which really meant he worked from the kitchen table on a laptop that was always open to fantasy football. He still lived at home, still had his laundry done by our stepmom, and still called me Seattle like it was a slur. The first few weeks were awkward. I kept to myself, applied to jobs, helped with chores, tried to make the best of things. But I could feel it, the tension. Like I disrupted a delicate balance I didn't even know existed. Every time I sat at the dinner table, Jake would find some way to mock me. So, any luck being relevant again, he'd say between mouthfuls of Mom's meatloaf. Dad never said much. Just sipped his drink, watched the game, and let Jake run his mouth. Then came the incident with the truck. Jake had borrowed my car one morning without asking. When I got outside to leave for an interview, it was gone. I called him. No answer. I called again. Finally, he picked up, sounding annoyed. "Relax, I'm picking up some stuff. I'll be back soon. You didn't even ask. I have an interview." "Then take Dad's truck," he said, and hung up. So I did. I grabbed Dad's keys and left. I made it to the interview 10 minutes late, with mud splattered up the sides of my pants from wading through our gravel driveway after last night's rain. The whole thing was a disaster. I didn't get the job. When I came back, Dad was waiting. "You took my truck without permission," he said coldly. I didn't have a choice. "Jake took my car. That doesn't give you the right to help yourself to mine." I blinked. "Are you serious right now?" "Dead serious. This house runs on respect, Evan. And you haven't earned much of that lately." That night, I started sleeping with the door locked. I wasn't scared, just tired. Tired of how quickly the house had turned against me. The worst part wasn't the words. It was the way they all looked at me like I didn't belong. Like I was the outsider, the burden, the mess that walked back in and ruined their carefully choreographed delusion of harmony. My stepmom, Brenda, avoided me completely. Jake had graduated from passive digs to open jabs. Dad? He had made up his mind from the beginning. This was a temporary nuisance, not a reunion. One night over dinner, Jake said, "Funny how you think you're better than us, and yet here you are, sleeping under our roof like a stray cat." Brenda chuckled. Dad smirked. I stared down at my plate. "I've never said I was better." "You didn't have to," Jake replied. "You just walk around with that face like we're all beneath you." I pushed my chair back and stood. "Thanks for dinner," I muttered. "Oh, look, the prodigal son is excusing himself," Jake mocked. What a shock. I didn't say anything. I just walked up the stairs. I thought I was getting good at ignoring it. But the silence that followed me up that night felt heavier than usual. The breaking point came a few days later. It was a Sunday afternoon. I'd just finished a virtual interview for a remote job that actually seemed promising. I came downstairs to grab a soda. Jake and Dad were watching football in the living room, shouting at the screen. I didn't plan to stay long. I grabbed a can from the fridge and turned to head back up when Jake blurted, "You know what's hilarious? You crashing back in here like we owe you something." I froze, turned slowly. Jake didn't even look at me. This house was finally peaceful. Then you showed up. Dad added, still not looking away from the TV, "Things were better before you came back." And that was it. No yelling, no dramatic confrontation. Just a moment. A switch flipping. Something dull and familiar inside me finally giving way. I didn't defend myself. I didn't ask for an apology. I just nodded once, turned around, walked upstairs, and packed my bags. I left that night. The next morning, I blocked them all. Phone, email, even Jake's smug social media. I checked into a short-term rental with what little cash I had left and started figuring things out again. A friend from Seattle lent me some money. Another connected me to a job lead. I wasn't sure what came next, but I knew who wouldn't be in it. And then, around noon, my phone buzzed. 22 missed calls. All from numbers I'd either blocked or didn't recognize. One voicemail had come through somehow. I stared at the notification. Listened. That's when everything changed. The voicemail was from Brenda. Of all people, I never expected her voice to be the one breaking through the digital wall I just finished building. She never used to call me. We barely spoke when I lived there, unless she needed something like the Wi-Fi password or for me to take the trash out when Jake forgot. But this voicemail, her voice was shaky, brittle in a way I didn't recognize. "Evan, I know you don't want to hear from any of us right now, but please, you need to call your dad. It's serious. He's in the hospital. He collapsed this morning. Just, please." That was it. No details. No explanation. Just a 10-second call that hit like a punch to the chest. I sat there on the edge of the guest bed, holding my phone like it might bite me. The first thought that came to mind wasn't panic, it was confusion. Why was she the one calling me? Why not Jake? And then, darker still, why was I even surprised? Brenda had always been the cleaner. The one who made messes disappear quietly. And apparently, that included trying to scrub me back in now that things had gone south. I didn't call back. Not right away. I just stared out the window for a long time, listening to the wind push the tree branches against the pane like fingers trying to tap their way in. My gut was a mess of things I didn't want to feel: resentment, guilt, fear, the twisted tug of old habits screaming go back. Be the good son. Be useful again. But I didn't move. Instead, I opened my laptop. I still had access to the shared family calendar on Google, something I'd set up years ago when I was trying to help them all stay organized. Brenda never used it. Dad barely looked at it. Jake had once changed my birthday reminder to Crybaby Evan Day, but I checked it anyway. And there it was. A meeting. Scheduled for that morning. Title: Trust Meeting. 10 a.m. Dad, Jake, Evan. I stared at it like it might rearrange itself. I hadn't been told anything about a meeting. My name was just slapped on like an afterthought. Was this some kind of trap? Or worse, a performance I was never meant to attend? My phone buzzed again. A new number. I didn't answer. Then a text came through. I know things were tense, but Dad said you should be there. Please. No name. Just that. My brain said Jake. My gut said maybe not. The language was too soft. Too careful. I couldn't sit still anymore. I grabbed my coat, shoved my laptop into my backpack, and booked a rideshare to the hospital. Every second of that ride, my head was a war zone. I kept trying to piece it together. Was this guilt? Manipulation? A genuine emergency? And if Dad really was in the hospital, what would I even say to him? When I got there, the receptionist directed me to the cardiac ward. My knees felt weird walking through those halls, like they weren't quite bending right. The last time I'd been in a hospital was when my grandfather died. I'd held his hand while my dad sat in the hallway on the phone with someone from work. Room 311. I knocked once and pushed the door open. Dad was awake. His face looked paler than I remembered. Older. He had tubes in his arms, and a beeping monitor behind him filled the silence I couldn't. Jake was there too, sitting beside the bed, slouched in the chair like he was just killing time waiting for a haircut. The second he saw me, he stood up. "You actually came," he muttered. I didn't answer. I looked at Dad. He didn't look surprised. Just tired. "You gonna sit, or just stand there like a ghost?" he asked. Still sharp. Still Dad. I took the chair by the window. Jake leaned back against the wall, arms crossed. Brenda wasn't there. So, I said quietly, "You okay?" Dad let out a huff. Heart rhythm was off. Doctor said it was stress. They've got me on something now. Says I gotta slow down. Do you need anything? I asked. He turned to look at me fully for the first time since I walked in. Yeah, he said. I need you to stop acting like a stranger. I blinked. Look, he continued. I know things got messy. We all said stuff we shouldn't have. But you storming off like that? Blocking everyone? That's not how family handles things. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because that's not how family handles things was such a stunning line coming from him. I opened my mouth, then closed it, then finally said, "You're serious? After everything?" Dad just stared at me. Jake stepped forward, arms still crossed. This isn't the time, man. No, I said, standing. It's exactly the time. Because I wasn't the one who started this. I came home because I needed help. And instead, I was treated like a parasite. Like a burden. You mocked me. He ignored me. Brenda pretended I didn't exist. And now, because he has a hospital bracelet, I'm supposed to forget all of that. Jake's mouth opened, but I held up a hand. I was humiliated every single day in that house. I lost my job, my apartment, everything. And I still tried to be respectful. I tried to stay quiet, keep the peace. But apparently, being quiet just makes me an easier target. Dad looked like he wanted to say something. But I wasn't done. You all treated me like I was the problem. When the truth is, I walked into a family that had already decided I didn't belong. Jake scoffed. You done? I turned to him. No, not yet. Because I saw that meeting on the calendar. The trust meeting. I wasn't invited, was I? You put my name on it like a prop. What was it even about? Silence. Then Dad muttered, "The house." My stomach dropped. What about it? Jake shifted his weight. It's going to me. Eventually. That's what we were discussing. I stared at them. Wait, you were planning the estate? And didn't even tell me? Dad sighed. It's complicated. No, I snapped. It's not. You just didn't want me there. Another long pause. I told them you wouldn't care, Jake added, almost proudly. And right then, I realized something. They'd already written me out. Not just of the house, but of the family plan. They'd circled the wagons, and I was left outside, holding a bag of goodwill that never meant a thing. I took a breath. Okay, I said, voice calm. Good to know. And just like that, I turned and walked out of the room. I didn't look back, but I had a plan. Because they were right about one thing, I had been quiet. Too quiet. By the time I reached the hospital parking lot, my hands were shaking, but not from grief. From clarity. The kind that comes when you finally stop hoping someone will change and start planning how to change everything around them. I sat in the back seat of my rideshare and opened the cloud drive on my phone. 10 years ago, I'd been the only one in the family who understood tech well enough to set up and digitize Dad's financial records. He'd handed me a battered box of folders and a coffee-stained notepad, and I spent an entire week scanning every deed, every insurance policy, every will draft, and every utility account into neatly labeled folders. So you can stop losing things, I'd joke back then. He laughed and said, "That's why you'll handle all this stuff when I'm gone." He had meant it then. But things change. People forget what you've done when it's no longer convenient to remember. I opened the house and legal folder. There it was, a scanned copy of the original deed. Dated 1996. Joint ownership, Dad and my mom, before she passed. Then a new transfer record from 2005, updated after the estate was consolidated into Dad's name. I remembered this because I'd driven him to the notary that day. He said he wanted it all squared away in case something happened. I'd been 20 back then. Jake had just flunked out of his second college attempt. And Brenda? She wasn't even legally married to Dad yet. But somehow, now, she and Jake were the ones having secret meetings about my childhood home. I scrolled down further. There was one document Jake definitely hadn't seen. The draft of the updated will I'd helped Dad prepare in 2020, during lockdown, when I was the only one checking in via Zoom every week, while everyone else was too busy waiting for things to blow over. And in that draft, in clean black text, it read, "Primary beneficiary of the estate, Evan Michael Ford." He never finalized it. The last line of the scanned note read, "To be reviewed and signed post-pandemic, April or May 2021. He never followed through. I don't know if he forgot or if Jake got in his ear. Maybe both. but the digital copy was still there, complete with the unsigned field. I had the email thread between us confirming I drafted it with a lawyer friend. I had everything. And now, I had something else, motivation. For the first time in months, I felt sharp again. I wasn't going to fight them for the house. I didn't want it. Not the physical space, not the memory-soaked walls, not the creaky stairs that heard more resentment than laughter. But I was done letting them treat me like a guest in a home I helped build. I had poured time, money, and tech skills into maintaining that place while Jake burned through his 20s playing business mogul with Dad's patience and Brenda's approval. I opened a blank document on my phone and started typing. Subject: Estate Review and Financial Misrepresentation, Request for Legal Clarification. I wasn't sending it to them. I was sending it to Dad's lawyer, the same one I referred years ago when Dad needed help refinancing. She and I had kept in touch. She knew the history. She had told me, once, "Evan, if they ever try to push you out of your family's story, call me." I remember who did the heavy lifting. By the time I got back to my short-term rental, I had already emailed her. I attached the unsigned will, the calendar screenshot of the so-called trust meeting, and a brief timeline of how things had deteriorated since I returned. I didn't ask her to sue. I didn't demand the house. All I asked for was clarity. A formal inquiry into whether Jake had already attempted to shift any assets. Whether Dad had changed anything without due process. Whether anything being planned could be legally contested or, at the very least, illuminated. 2 hours later, I got her reply. "You were wise to act now. I'll begin the review this week. Do not alert them yet. If anything has moved behind your back, we'll know soon." I stared at that last line for a long time. If anything has moved behind your back, I had a feeling it had. 3 days passed. I ignored the texts. The missed calls slowed, but they never fully stopped. Jake left me a voicemail at one point, just 10 seconds long. "You've made your point. Can you stop acting like a victim now?" I didn't respond, but I did start pulling every financial receipt I could find from the last 12 years. Because here's the thing. When your family forgets who helped them, they assume they're not indebted to you. But I kept receipts. Literal ones. The year Dad needed a new furnace, I paid half and never asked to be repaid. The time Jake's business accidentally charged $3,200 to my Amex before tanking, I covered it because Brenda said he was in a rough spot. And even the landscaping they bragged about to guests, those hedges and that retaining wall, I Venmo'd the contractor and covered the permit fee myself. It added up, more than they realized. By the end of the week, I had forwarded everything to the lawyer. And that's when the real shift happened. Saturday morning, I woke up to a new voicemail, not from Jake or Brenda or even Dad. From my cousin Hannah, the only one in the family who had ever been neutral. Her voice was tense, almost rushed. "Evan, I don't know what you did or what's going on, but Jake's freaking out. I overheard him yelling at Brenda about the will and the lawyer being involved. He said something about everything falling apart if Evan pushes it. I didn't want to get in the middle, but you deserve to know they're hiding something." That was it. That was the confirmation. They hadn't just tried to cut me out. They had been moving quickly, probably while Dad was still sedated, trying to cement something they knew I might be able to contest. Something they thought I'd never catch in time. They were wrong. I took a deep breath after Hannah's message ended. A strange calm settled over me. Not relief, not vindication, just clarity. Everything I'd suspected had a foundation now. They weren't just petty. They were strategic. They didn't lash out because they were emotional. They did it because they wanted me gone, both emotionally and legally. But what they forgot, what so many people forget, is that the quiet one often sees everything and remembers everything. By Monday morning, Dad was discharged. I knew because Brenda posted one of those smiling "home at last" pictures on Facebook, with Dad holding a mug like he hadn't just tried to ghostwrite his eldest son out of the family legacy. The caption read, "Family is what gets you through the storm." I didn't like it. I didn't comment, but I took a screenshot, just in case. That same day, my lawyer, Ms. Alder, sent me a file labeled Preliminary Findings. Inside was a summary of everything she'd uncovered so far. 2 weeks prior to Dad's collapse, Jake had convinced him to begin a transfer of joint ownership of the house for tax efficiency. The paperwork was incomplete and signed and in legal limbo, but Jake had used that progress to start applying for an equity line of credit against the property through an old acquaintance who worked at a local credit union. The trust meeting I hadn't been invited to was meant to finalize new arrangements that would grant Jake financial power of attorney, essentially cutting me out of any future decisions, including those regarding Dad's care, property, or remaining investments. But the most damning part? Jake and Brenda had listed themselves as the two primary caregivers in a document they were preparing to submit to Dad's insurance provider, one that would grant them monthly stipends for managing care of a dependent elder. Dad was 61, hardly a helpless man, and they were already positioning him like a walking liability to cash in on. I forwarded the file to Dad's personal email. No message, no explanation, just facts. A day later, he texted me. "Can we talk? Just you and me." We met at a small diner on the edge of town. I picked the place. Neutral ground. Somewhere quiet enough to talk, but not so quiet he could try to rewrite history without being noticed. He looked tired when he arrived. A little thinner, more weathered than even the hospital photos had suggested. He slid into the booth across from me and folded his hands. "I got your email." I didn't say anything. He let out a breath. "You blindsided me." I raised an eyebrow. "I blindsided you?" He winced. "Okay. Maybe that's not fair. But it didn't have to go this way." "You're right," I said. "It didn't. You could have told me what was going on. You could have called that trust meeting something else and invited me. You could have asked why I left instead of assuming I was being dramatic. But you didn't. You let Jake and Brenda box me out like I was some stranger wandering in." Dad looked down at his hands. "I didn't know Jake had started the transfer. I signed a couple of things thinking it was just housekeeping, refinancing, maybe simplifying the will. I didn't know he was applying for loans." He paused. "And I sure didn't know about the insurance scam." That made me pause. "So, you're saying he lied to you too?" He nodded slowly. "I'm not proud of it. I haven't been paying attention like I should have. I let Brenda handle the paperwork. I trusted Jake to talk to the lawyer. I thought, maybe if I just gave him something to manage, he'd finally grow up." I leaned back, arms crossed. He didn't. He grew entitled. There was silence between us for a long minute. Then Dad asked, "What do you want, Evan? You going to take him to court?" "Me too." I shook my head. "No, I don't want the house. I don't want to ruin you. I just want the truth out in the open. And I want it to stop. The rewriting, the sneaking, the way everyone acts like I don't count just because I moved away and made a life that didn't orbit around this town." Dad looked up at me. For the first time in years, his eyes didn't look defensive. They looked ashamed. "You did everything right," he said quietly. "You got out. You built something. And I let them make you feel like that was a betrayal." I didn't say anything. "I'll fix it," he said. "No," I replied. "We fix it. Or not at all." That night, Dad called a full family meeting. In person. At the house. I almost didn't go. But part of me needed to see it through. Not for them, for me. When I walked in, Brenda was perched on the arm of the couch like she was posing for a reality show confessional. Jake was already pacing, clearly fuming. He didn't even look at me. Dad stood at the center of the living room. When I arrived, he nodded once and spoke before anyone else could. "We're changing some things," he said. Jake scoffed. "What is this? A lecture?" "No," Dad said firmly. "It's a reckoning." Brenda rolled her eyes. "Oh, please." "I've reviewed the documents," Dad continued, ignoring her. "I know what you both tried to do. The backdoor transfer. The applications. The lies. And Evan has every right to be furious. I'm furious." "You're siding with him?" Jake snapped. "I'm siding with the truth," Dad shot back. The room went dead quiet. Brenda opened her mouth to argue, but Dad raised a hand. "Enough. You two took advantage of my name, my health, and my trust. Starting now, I'm revoking your financial access to the house. No more credit applications. No loans. Nothing without my oversight. And the power of attorney you pushed for? Shredded." Brenda stood. "You can't just cut us out." "I can't," Dad said. "And I will." Then he turned to me. "I'm amending the will. This time for real. Evan, I want you listed as executor. You're the only one I trust to handle this when I'm gone." Jake stormed out. Brenda followed, muttering something under her breath. I didn't celebrate. I didn't smirk. I just stood there, the weight of a decade's worth of rejection finally lifting. It didn't make everything okay, but it made something right. A week later, I moved back to Seattle. New apartment. New job. Clean break. I still talk to Dad. Sometimes even Brenda. Jake? Not once. And I'm okay with that. Because some stories don't need a reunion arc. Some stories need closure. and I finally had mine. I was never the kind of person who liked to stir the pot. I preferred quiet victories, behind-the-scenes wins, and letting my actions speak louder than my voice ever could. My name's Samuel, I'm 27, and if you asked most people in my family, they'd say I was the quiet one. Not the golden child. That title belonged to my younger sister Ava, the living embodiment of our parents' every dream. No, I was the one who kept to himself, who never really fit the family vibe. Whatever that means. For years, I played my part. I showed up to birthdays with gifts I knew wouldn't get a thank you. I endured backhanded compliments from my mom about how techie stuff is cute, but not real work, even after I landed a remote job in finance that paid more than my dad's did after 3 decades. I kept my mouth shut when they introduced Ava as our future lawyer, and then forgot to mention I'd just helped close a $2.5 million deal. And when Ava got engaged last fall, you better believe the family group chat exploded. Every message was a variation of, "Our little girl is getting married. Can you believe it?" I could believe it. What I couldn't believe was how invisible I felt while reading all that. Still, I congratulated her. I called. I even sent her and her fiancé a gift, an engraved gold pen set, meant to symbolize signing your future together. I thought it was clever. Ava never responded, not even a text. I figured it got lost in the wedding planning chaos. That's what I kept telling myself anyway. My relationship with my parents had always been complicated. They weren't cruel, just selective with their affection. They saw Ava as the reflection of themselves, polished, sociable, driven by appearances. I was the opposite, reserved, methodical, uninterested in clout or flashy status symbols. I didn't go to the Ivy League school they wanted. I didn't join the country club. I bought a modest townhouse instead of some luxury condo. And worst of all, I didn't include them in every detail of my life. But I thought we were past all that. I thought we'd settled into an understanding. I'd live my life, they'd live theirs, and we'd all smile at Thanksgiving. Until I got the text. It was a random Tuesday evening. I had just wrapped up a Zoom call with a client in Singapore, opened a bottle of red, and was halfway through a mediocre steak when my phone buzzed. It was my mom. "You're not welcome at the ceremony," the message read. "Ava's parents-in-law think you'd be awkward." I read it twice. 3 times. My first instinct was confusion. I scrolled up to check if I'd missed a prior message. Nope. That was it. No hi. No sorry. No explanation. Just a firm disinvitation wrapped in passive aggression. I stared at the words. The way awkward was framed in ellipses like I was some unpredictable wild card they had to keep locked away. I didn't even know how to respond at first. My chest tightened. Not with rage, at least not yet, but something closer to disbelief. I wasn't just excluded from the reception or asked to keep a low profile. I was flat out unwelcome. At my own sister's wedding. Because someone thought my presence might upset the aesthetic. I typed, "So image matters more than family," and hit send before I could second guess it. A few seconds later, the message was marked read. No reply. That silence said everything. I didn't sleep much that night. My mind kept looping through old family gatherings. Every time I paid for dinner, and they barely acknowledged it. Every birthday I showed up for only to feel like an outsider. Every conversation Ava dominated while I was told to let her have her moment. What kept me up wasn't just the rejection. It was the realization that I had been naive enough to think I mattered equally. That somehow, if I kept showing up, kept being dependable, they'd finally treat me like more than a footnote in Ava's golden biography. But here's the thing. I wasn't the same 17-year-old they used to talk over. I wasn't some shy college kid trying to prove himself. I was successful. Quietly, yes, but successful. And what they didn't know, what they had forgotten, was that they were standing on a foundation that I helped build. A very specific foundation that gave them the dream wedding venue, the designer catering, and even the luxury honeymoon fund. A foundation I owned, legally and financially. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Back when Ava got engaged, our mom had called me, gushing about her once-in-a-lifetime vision for the ceremony. She said it had to be perfect, grand but tasteful, elegant but youthful. I had tuned most of it out until she mentioned their biggest hurdle, funding. Ava's fiancé was still in grad school, and while her future in-laws were respectable, they weren't wealthy. My parents had dipped into retirement savings just to book the first deposits. So naturally, they turned to me. Just a short-term investment, my mom had said over speakerphone. You can write it off, and you'd be part of something truly beautiful. She didn't ask if I wanted to contribute. She assumed I would. And honestly, at the time, I didn't mind. I figured it'd be nice to do something generous, maybe even shift the family dynamic a little. What I didn't know was how forgettable my generosity would become. We set it up properly. Well, I did. I told them I'd front the cost through my LLC, so it was cleaner tax-wise. That way, all vendor contracts, deposits, and invoices would technically go through me. They agreed. They just wanted the money. And I gave it. Every last dime. Venue deposit? Covered. Custom flower arrangements from some boutique in Napa? Paid. A down payment on that ridiculous harpist who only played during sunset ceremonies? Yep. All in my name. They didn't even question it. Because in their eyes, I was just the bank. But now, after that text, after being told that Samuel, the brother, the son, wasn't good enough for their curated little spectacle, I sat on that thought for a few days. I didn't lash out. I didn't confront anyone. I let it simmer like a slow boil. Because if there's one thing I've learned over the years, it's that timing is everything. You don't react when you're emotional. You wait. You observe. You prepare. And then you move. I started digging through the wedding documents. The contracts, the authorizations, the payment receipts. I wanted to see just how deep their dependency went, and whether they even realized how precarious their little tower of perfection was. That's when I found something interesting. Not just one thing, multiple things. Quiet little clauses buried in the contracts that all pointed to the same truth. If I pulled out, the entire production would crumble. And they had no idea. They thought I was just the awkward one. I smiled. And then I made a call. Just one. I didn't make that call right away. I thought about it for 2 more days, replaying everything like a scratched record. The message, the silence, the years leading up to it. I told myself I didn't need to escalate. That maybe Ava would call, say it was a misunderstanding, tell me she wanted me there. Maybe mom had sent that text in a moment of stress. Weddings were chaotic. People said things they didn't mean. But no call came. No apology. Nothing. And as the days passed, the more I saw the truth for what it was. This wasn't a one-time slight. It was the final move in a long, quiet campaign to box me out of the family, brick by brick, smile by forced smile. I spent the next weekend doing something I hadn't done in years. I scrolled through old photos. Birthdays, holidays, those blurry Christmas morning shots. And there I was in the corners, always slightly out of frame. Ava in the center, wrapped in a bow or holding the microphone or getting the last piece of cake. Even in group shots, I was the afterthought, standing to the side, kneeling in front, holding someone else's drink. And it wasn't just the pictures. It was the family vacation when I was 19 where they forgot to book me a room and told me I could just crash on the couch while Ava got the suite. It was the time my parents drove 4 hours to surprise her during finals with a care package and didn't even text me at my own college, one that was 30 minutes away. It was the way my dad introduced me at reunions. This is Sam. He works with computers or finance or something. Smart kid. Then he'd practically shout, and this is our Ava. She's going to law school. It had always been that way. I just didn't want to see it. I kept hoping that one big gesture, one favor, one donation, one thoughtful gift might shift things, might earn me a seat at the same table. But instead, all it did was confirm to them that I'd never demand anything, that I'd give without question and disappear quietly when asked. And that, I realized, was exactly why they felt comfortable texting me that I was awkward and uninvited. Not even a phone call. Not even an attempt to pretend it was about capacity or logistics. Just, you don't fit. I didn't tell anyone what I was planning. Not yet. But I started taking mental inventory of what I actually meant to these people, beyond my wallet. It wasn't long before the next blow came. It was a Thursday evening, and I was halfway through reviewing quarterly numbers for a client when a knock came at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, I saw a familiar figure, Uncle Ray. Now, Uncle Ray was one of the only relatives who ever treated me like a human being. He wasn't flashy. He worked as a mechanic for 30 years, loved football, and made killer ribs. He never picked sides in the family hierarchy, but he always made time for me, even when others didn't. Got a minute? He asked, holding up a 6-pack. I nodded and let him in. We sat on the back patio, the sun just starting to dip below the rooftops. After a few minutes of silence, he finally spoke. Samuel, I heard about the wedding. I raised an eyebrow. What about it? He gave me a look. The kind that said, don't play dumb. They're telling everyone you're not coming because you don't support Ava's relationship. That you've always been jealous. That you made things tense at the engagement party. I blinked. What? I figured it was crap, he said. But it's spreading. Your mom told your Aunt Jan that you made Ava cry. Said you criticized her fiancé's career path. Then said you pulled out of the ceremony because you were bitter she's getting married before you. I felt my stomach twist. That was the game now? Rewriting the narrative before I could speak. I didn't even go to the engagement party, I said slowly. I was in San Diego on business. Ray nodded. I know, but no one's bothering to fact-check. You've always been quiet. Makes it easy for them to fill in the blanks. I stared into my drink. My jaw clenched so hard I felt my molars ache. They think I'll stay quiet, I muttered. Ray just nodded again. That night, I sat at my desk and pulled out every document I had connected to the wedding. I had itemized records of every wire transfer, every signed vendor agreement, every clause and condition. The catering deposit alone was 20 grand, and the refund clause allowed for cancellation up to 72 hours before the event. The harpist required a signed performance release, my signature. The venue required the payee, me, to confirm final guest numbers by a specific date or forfeit the time slot. They had built their entire fantasy wedding on my foundation, and they didn't even bother to hide the betrayal. Over the next week, I played nice. I didn't push. I didn't call or text. I just watched. They removed me from the wedding Facebook group. Ava blocked me on Instagram, probably to stop me from stealing her thunder. I got no invitation to the rehearsal dinner, though Uncle Ray told me it was being held at a private estate north of the city. Classy. Expensive. And then, the final slap. I was at my parents' house one Sunday evening, picking up some documents my dad had left behind in a mutual safety deposit box we shared from years ago. As I was getting ready to leave, my mom passed by the doorway and paused. By the way, she said, like it was nothing, we found someone to take over the rest of the payments. So you don't need to worry about it. I froze. What? The wedding? I know you were worried about expenses, she said with a patronizing smile. Ava's in-laws stepped up. We're all good now. I knew she was lying. Knew it by the way she wouldn't meet my eyes. No contract has been changed, I said. Everything's still under my LLC. She shrugged. Well, that's fine. As long as you're not getting involved anymore. That's when it hit me. They weren't just ignoring me. They were replacing me. Rewriting history in real time. Telling people I was unstable, selfish, dramatic. Telling Ava I didn't care. Telling the family I was jealous. They were cutting me out completely, while still standing on the money I gave them. I drove home in silence. I didn't even turn on the radio. That night, I pulled up every vendor contract again. One by one, I started making phone calls. Not to cancel. Not yet. Just to confirm exactly what I could do. And when. The venue? If I didn't provide final guest numbers and payment confirmation 2 weeks out, the reservation would be voided. The caterer? I could cancel with 72 hours notice and receive a partial refund. The harpist? Performance not guaranteed without signed release. And the videographer? Scheduled through my company. If I withdrew the team, no documentation would be delivered. No edits. No footage. Every piece. Every detail. They were all in my hands. And they didn't have a clue. But I wasn't going to throw the match just yet. No, I was going to wait. Let them bask in their own perfection. Let Ava post her countdown to the big day stories. Let my parents brag about the open bar and imported flowers. Let them hand out place cards and print custom napkins with their names in gold leaf. Because the best part of a house of cards falling apart is watching the moment they realize who pulled the bottom piece. And I already had that piece in my pocket. I just needed the right moment to drop it. It's strange how fast your own family can make you feel like a stranger in your own life. One moment you're offering help, trying to show up for them in the only way you know how. And the next, you're watching from the sidelines while they rewrite your story without you in it. After that conversation with my mom, if you can even call it a conversation, I didn't just feel excluded. I felt erased. They didn't just cut me out of the wedding. They cut me out of the narrative entirely. For the first few days after that, I went dark. I stopped checking the family group chats, didn't answer any calls, even from Uncle Ray. I logged off work early, ignored emails, didn't bother with my meal prep or gym routine. I just let myself float. I'd always prided myself on keeping it together, being the dependable one, the calm one, the the quiet fix-it guy in a family full of noise and drama. But now I was exhausted. I didn't have it in me to pretend like this didn't break something inside me. I wasn't angry yet. I was just tired. Tired of being disposable. I let myself sit in that for a while. I ordered takeout every night. Always too much food, and left the dishes in the sink. I slept at odd hours and stopped shaving. It wasn't a dramatic spiral. Just a quiet unraveling. I wasn't used to being the problem in someone else's story. And now that I apparently was, I had no idea how to act. The worst part was that I still kept checking my phone. Every few hours, I'd open it without thinking, half hoping, half dreading a message from Ava. An apology, maybe. Or even just a crappy excuse. Something like, sorry things got out of hand. I didn't mean for you to be uninvited. But the silence was total. Cold. Clinical. The girl I grew up with, who used to beg me to braid her hair, who used to sneak into my room to watch cartoons when she was scared at night, was gone. Or maybe that version of her never really existed. Maybe I just saw what I wanted to see. It took about a week of this limbo before I finally reached out to someone. Not family, definitely not them. I texted Kira. Kira and I had dated briefly about a year and a half ago. We didn't work out romantically, different timelines, different goals, but we'd stayed close. She was a landscape architect, always busy, always sketching or traveling for a site visit. But she had this calm energy about her that made people open up. I didn't even plan what I'd say. I just texted her. Got time for a drink? She replied in 5 minutes. Absolutely. You okay? I wasn't. But I wanted to be. We met up at this quiet rooftop bar downtown, somewhere far from the usual haunts where my family might show up. I hadn't seen Kira in months, but she hugged me like it had been days. You look like hell, she said, smiling gently. Appreciate the honesty. We ordered drinks, sat under a string of glowing bulbs, and I told her everything. The text, the lies, the disinvitation, the part where they used my money and then made me the villain. I didn't cry, but my voice cracked a few times. More than I expected. She didn't interrupt, just listened. When I finally finished, she leaned back and let out a low breath. Damn, yeah, they always been like that. I nodded slowly. Yeah, I just didn't want to see it. She was quiet for a second. Then, so what now? I shrugged. I don't know. I have all the control, technically. I could pull everything. Cancel the venue, cut off the vendors, let it all collapse. And believe me, I've thought about it. But part of me still wants to be seen by them. Not for revenge. Just, for once, I want them to acknowledge what I gave. What I meant. Like maybe if I pull the plug, they'll finally realize what they lost. Kira sipped her drink and looked me dead in the eye. Samuel, they already know. They just don't care. That hit harder than anything else I'd heard. And it was the truth. They knew who I was. What I'd done. They just didn't want it to count. I stayed quiet for a while after that. Then I asked her something I hadn't even admitted I was struggling with. Do you think I'm just hard to love? Kira looked at me for a long time. Not with pity, just with this quiet, focused kindness I wasn't used to. I think you were raised by people who didn't know how to love anything they couldn't control. You made yourself small for them. And now that you stopped, they're punishing you for it. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Stop shrinking. That night, something shifted. I went home and cleaned my apartment top to bottom. I shaved. I organized my files. I made an actual grocery list. And for the first time in weeks, I slept through the night. The next morning, I woke up with this strange clarity. Like a fog had finally lifted. I didn't need to be part of their wedding. I didn't need to be at that ceremony, sitting at the distant cousin table, pretending to be happy while they toasted each other for pulling off a fairy tale. What I needed was to take back my narrative. Quietly. Strategically. With purpose. So I started rebuilding. Not with grand gestures or petty revenge, yet. Just with routine. I re-engaged with work. Hard. I took on a new project that had been sitting in my inbox for weeks. A fintech startup looking to restructure their budgeting systems. The kind of thing I used to eat up before everything got cloudy. I put in 12-hour days, but it felt good. Sharp. Focused. I started running again too. Nothing crazy, just a few miles each morning, but it helped clear my head. And I stopped checking my phone. If they wanted to reach me, they could, but I wasn't going to chase them anymore. A few weeks passed. The wedding was creeping closer. I kept tabs on things, not obsessively, just enough to know the timeline. I monitored the vendor contracts quietly, making notes on deadlines and refund thresholds. But mostly, I kept my head down and built my life back. Kira and I started hanging out more, platonic, but warm. She had this way of making everything feel grounded. We'd meet up on Sundays, grab coffee, walk through the park. She never pushed, never pried, just gave me space to be myself. And in that space, I realized something. I had always been enough. I just happened to be born into a family that couldn't see it. One night, about a month before the wedding, I got an email from the venue. A simple reminder, final guest list and payment confirmation due in 7 days or reservation will be released per contract terms. I stared at it for a long time. They hadn't reached out. No one had asked me to confirm. No one had mentioned my name in any update. I was still ghosted. They were either assuming I'd stay quiet, or they were gambling I didn't have the guts to follow through. I flagged the email and let it sit. 6 days passed. Still nothing. No calls. No texts. No messages. Not even a just checking in from Ava or a guilt trip from Dad. On the 7th day, I opened my laptop. I took a deep breath, and I hovered over the reply button. That's when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. I answered. Hello. There was a pause. Then, Sam? It's Grace. Ava's maid of honor. I blinked. I'd met Grace once, maybe twice. She was the type of person who posted Instagram stories of every brunch and called herself a vibes curator. Hey, I said cautiously. What's up? She laughed nervously. So weird thing. I was trying to finalize some seating stuff for the reception, and Ava mentioned something about you handling the venue, but then she said you weren't involved anymore. This might be awkward, but do you have, like, the invoice or something? We're trying to finalize headcount and I cut her off. I'm still listed on the contract, I said. Technically, no one else can finalize anything without my confirmation. Silence. Oh, Ava didn't mention that. I bet she didn't. I'll tell you what, I said calmly. Have Ava call me directly. We can figure it out. Grace was flustered. Right? Yeah, totally. I'll let her know. She hung up fast. I stared at the phone for a long time. It had begun. They needed me, but they still hadn't reached out. And that was going to cost them. Because what they didn't know was that I already had a plan. I had already pulled one of the contracts. Not the venue. Not the caterer. Something smaller. Something that wouldn't set off alarms. But enough to shake the foundation. Let's rewind a bit. Before Grace called me, before the venue reminder email, before I even cleaned my apartment and started jogging again, I had already set the first piece in motion. It happened late one night, maybe 2 days after Uncle Ray came over. I couldn't sleep. I was still stuck in that weird mental limbo between heartbreak and quiet rage, flipping through wedding planning documents on my laptop like they were crime scene files. That's when I saw the vendor I had forgotten all about. The ice sculpture artist. Yes, an actual ice sculptor. Because, apparently, Ava wanted a custom swan centerpiece that would melt gracefully during the reception, symbolizing the beauty and fragility of love. I wish I was making that up. The invoice wasn't large, only a couple $1,000s, but the artist was temperamental. His contract had a specific clause that stood out to me now, bolded and underlined. Sculpture cannot be altered, rescheduled, or finalized without written confirmation from the original client by date. If confirmation is not received by deadline, agreement is void and deposit non-refundable. The deadline was 3 days away. I sat back in my chair. I could have ignored it, let it expire, but something about it was just poetic. This fragile, ridiculous symbol of their fairy tale melting away, not at the reception, but before it ever arrived. So I emailed the artist and said I was withdrawing the order. No swan, no sculpture. Keep the deposit. He didn't argue. Said he'd been booked up anyway and was relieved to have one less commitment. And just like that, a small piece of the wedding fell quietly out of place. No one noticed, but it made me feel something I hadn't felt in weeks. Control. That was the moment I realized something big. I didn't need to ruin the wedding with one dramatic blow. I didn't need to be explosive. I didn't want scorched earth. What I wanted was for the entire thing to collapse under the weight of its own lies. Quietly. Strategically. So I started planning. I pulled up every contract, every timeline, every clause. I made a spreadsheet. Vendor names, deadlines, cancellation terms, refund amounts, points of contact, backup plans, the works. Then I sorted them into 3 categories. Soft pulls, minor things I could cancel or withdraw that wouldn't raise alarms, but would start to inconvenience the event. Critical fails, services that, if pulled, would create chaos. These included the catering, transportation, and most importantly, the venue itself. Delays and distractions, elements that wouldn't cancel the wedding but would throw the planning into disarray. The custom seating arrangement software, licensed through me, the photographer's editing turnaround, contracted under my LLC, and the imported floral arch that required my final approval to ship. Now, here's the thing about revenge. It tastes better when it's earned. I wasn't going to unleash this all at once. I wanted them to feel safe, confident. I wanted them to post their countdowns, brag to their friends, walk into that rehearsal dinner thinking they'd won. And then, click, I'd pull the rug out from under them. But to do that, I needed help. So I called Uncle Ray. He answered on the first ring. "You all right?" he asked. "Better now," I said. "But I need to ask you something, and it might put you in a weird position." "I'm listening." I told him the basics. Not everything, just enough. That I was still technically in control of the wedding infrastructure. That they were using my money, my company, my name. And that they had no clue how close they were to losing it all. Then I asked the big question. "Can you keep your ear to the ground? Let me know what they're saying. If they suspect anything?" Ray didn't even hesitate. "You got it." I trusted him. He wasn't just doing it out of loyalty. He'd seen this family operate long enough to understand the dynamics. He knew what it was like to be shoved to the side when you didn't fit their narrative. And honestly, I think he wanted to see it fall too. Over the next couple of weeks, he fed me intel. Ava's fiancé's family had no idea I was funding everything. They were told my parents had connections with a generous investor who helped secure the venue. Ava spun it as a kind of Cinderella story, her humble roots, the fairy godmother funding, and the perfect day coming together through destiny and grit. Disgusting. Meanwhile, my parents doubled down on the lie that I had pulled out early and wasn't coming because I didn't support the marriage. They even told a few relatives that I had gone a bit off lately and was overly sensitive. Every time Ray told me this, I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it confirmed exactly what I needed. They weren't just entitled. They were arrogant. They genuinely believed they could throw me away and still keep the house I built. I gave them rope. Then I started yanking it. First, I emailed the catering company and asked to adjust the menu. Just minor things. Remove the shrimp appetizer, swap out the champagne tier. I claimed the client had dietary concerns. This triggered a mandatory reconfirmation email back to the listed contact, me, along with a request for updated payment details. I didn't respond. This triggered a hold on the service. No food, no drinks, not without updated confirmation. 3 days later, I got a panicked email from the caterer asking if the event was still on. I told them to hold tight. We were revisiting the structure. Translation, let them sweat. Then I contacted the flower distributor. The imported arch Ava wanted, hand-selected from a specialty nursery in the Netherlands, required phytosanitary clearance and customs processing. But my approval was missing. They wouldn't ship without it. I didn't approve. Strike 2. Then I logged into the wedding seating software, the one I had licensed to Ava's wedding planner for free under my LLC. I revoked the license. The planner messaged me in a panic. I told her the software was under maintenance and might be unavailable for an extended period. She wasn't happy. Ava would be even less. But I wasn't done. The next piece came from Ray. He told me Ava had started to worry. Little things were slipping. The harpist never confirmed her set list. The seating chart kept crashing. The florist went silent. And the caterer, who Ava hadn't spoken to directly at all, still hadn't sent a final tasting confirmation. They were too proud to admit they were losing control. Too confident I wouldn't retaliate. I wanted to laugh. But I waited. The rehearsal dinner was 2 weeks away. I planned to wait until the last minute. But then, something shifted. Uncle Ray called me one night. Said my mom was at brunch with some extended relatives. Bragging. She said you were so unstable lately. It was a blessing you weren't coming. Said you might have ruined the photos or made a scene. And get this. She said you're lucky they didn't sue you for harassment over the ice sculpture cancellation. My jaw locked. That was it. I had given them every chance. Given them silence. Given them grace. Now I was done giving. So I moved up the timeline. I drafted 6 emails. 1 to the venue, confirming cancellation due to unforeseen complications. 1 to the catering company, formally terminating the agreement. 1 to the florist, canceling the import permit. 1 to the photographer, requesting they stand down. 1 to the transportation company, rescinding the wedding shuttle service, and one to Ava, but I didn't send hers yet, because I wanted her to find out the hard way first. I scheduled the vendor emails to go out 72 hours before the rehearsal dinner. Just enough time to ruin everything, but not enough to fix it. 72 hours before the rehearsal dinner, the emails went out. No dramatic subject lines. No gloating. Just clean, professional language. Due to a change in circumstances, we are terminating the service agreement, effective immediately. Per clause 4.2 of the contract, payment was non-refundable, and the event is no longer proceeding as initially scheduled. Do not proceed with any further work. Please confirm receipt. 6 messages. 6 dominoes. And then, I waited. I didn't check my phone obsessively, didn't pace the room or wring my hands like I thought I might. Instead, I spent that morning on a walk, the kind where the sun hits the pavement just right and the world feels like it's humming in time with your heartbeat. I bought myself coffee. I even stopped at a bookstore and picked up a new journal. That afternoon, I opened my laptop, went into the shared drive I'd created for the wedding vendors, and deleted it. It was quiet, efficient, cold, just like they had been. And then, the phone calls started. I let them all go to voicemail. The first came from the wedding planner. Then 2 more from unknown numbers. One from the caterer's assistant. By evening, Ava's name lit up my screen in rapid succession. Calls, FaceTime attempts, even a few texts that started out vague. Sam, please, call me back. This is urgent. Then they got angrier. What the hell did you do? Are you insane? I swear to God, if you don't fix this. I didn't respond. Not yet. Because the real firestorm was still coming. By midnight, the emails had clearly reached the entire family. My dad's number popped up. My mom's. I let them all rot in missed calls. I didn't want an apology. I wanted them to sit in the consequences. Feel every bit of the silence they had once shoved down my throat. The next morning, I finally called one person, Uncle Ray. He picked up sounding equal parts exhausted and delighted. They're in shambles, he said. I mean, Samuel, it's like someone set a grenade off in their group chat. Your mom's losing her mind. Ava's threatening legal action. I actually laughed. Let her. I have the contracts. Every receipt. Every agreement. You do realize they're trying to pin this on you now, right? Of course, I said calmly. That's the best part. Because here's the thing. I never once said I was canceling the wedding. I simply terminated the services I was contracted to, which meant they weren't suing a malicious brother out of spite. They were begging to fix a broken system they never bothered to understand. They had no backups, no alternative contacts, no financial trail that included Ava or my parents. Every major piece of that wedding was tangled up in me. They just never thought I'd pull the plug, but I did. And now the fairy tale had no catering, no venue, no flowers, no music, no shuttle, and no time to fix it. But I wasn't quite finished. There was one last thing I had to do. So I finally opened my text thread with Ava. I typed slowly, carefully. You asked me not to come to your wedding because I would be awkward. Then you used me for everything. Told lies. Rewrote history. I stayed quiet. I let it go. But here's the truth. Ava, I was never the problem. I was your solution. And now that I'm gone, you finally see what that means. This wasn't revenge. This was clarity. I hit send. Then I blocked her. That night, I turned off my phone completely. Made a nice dinner. Poured a glass of wine. Slept like a rock. The following morning, Ray called me again. You need to hear this, he said, and played a voicemail he'd received from my dad. Apparently, they had scrambled all night trying to salvage what they could. Ava's fiancé's family was furious, embarrassed, blindsided, and threatening to pull their own support. Word was spreading through the extended relatives. My mom tried to pivot the narrative again, claiming it was my instability that caused the mess. But too many people knew now. Too many vendors had forwarded email trails. Too many receipts had my name on them, not hers, not Ava's. And just like that, the story started to shift. Suddenly, I wasn't the bitter brother anymore. I was the guy who held the whole thing together and then walked away. Not out of rage, but because they made me a ghost and forgot that ghosts can still haunt. The wedding didn't happen that weekend. They tried to hold a small ceremony in a relative's backyard with fold-out chairs and homemade decorations, but most of the guests bailed. The vibe had soured. The story had leaked. And you know what? That was the most satisfying part. It wasn't about destroying their day. It was about watching them struggle to replace what they never appreciated in the first place. They thought they could control the narrative. But I wrote the ending. A week later, I got a letter in the mail. A handwritten one from my mom. The handwriting was shaky, like she didn't know how to sound genuine, but was trying. It read, "Samuel, we were hurt. Shocked. We never thought you'd take it this far. But after hearing what happened, I suppose I understand. I won't say sorry yet because I don't know if you'd believe me. But I hope one day you'll come back to the family. Love, Mom." I folded the letter once and slid it back into the envelope. No return address. No apology. Just damage control disguised as remorse. I never responded. Because I didn't need to. I had already said everything they needed to hear. Not with words, but with silence. And silence, it turns out, is the loudest kind of revenge. They erased me from their wedding, so I erased their wedding from existence.